Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call the September 27th, 2022 Virginia Marine Resources Commission to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance by Associate Member France, followed by the invocation by Associate Member Tank.
We'll all stand and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. As summer gives way to fall, we are easily able to enjoy the beauty of our coast and all that you have bestowed upon us. We are committed stewards of your creation. Preservation of our natural resources is a challenge we take on with science and analytical thinking. Further, we are stewards of our democracy. All here will be treated equally under the rule of law. We ask that our deliberations and decisions be honest and forthright. For this we pray. Amen.
Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, we got an agenda item that we're going to have to separate before we get approval of the agenda. Item 2C needs to be separated to itself due to a conflict. We've got to have a member recuse themselves.
Yes, I need to recuse myself. My husband has interest in a business that leases from the city of Newport News.
When we get to that item, you don't have to recuse yet. When we get to it, we'll let you know. But I need a motion to separate that item by itself on the agenda. And
So moved.
so moved by Mr. Tankard.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. France. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, so we can move on. Minutes. I asked if there's any corrections, deletions, or changes from the commission members or staff from the August 23rd, 2022 commission meeting. Being said, I have
Motion to approve.
motion to approve by Member Erskine. Need a second? Second by Tankard. All those approved, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
One abstention.
One abstention.
Abstain.
All right, so Mr. France and Mr. Minor abstain. All right, now we're in the swearing the VMRC staff and VIM staff that will be speaking and presenting testimony during the meeting. Please stand, raise your right hand. I swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. All right. All right, Randy, the floor is yours, it looks like. You want to hear item 2C first, so we can allow Mrs. Kellum to recuse herself? Go ahead, Mrs. Kellum, thank you. We'll move on to item 2C first.
Good morning, everyone. For the collective cases, our page 2 items are projects over $500,000 in cost and subjected to a standard public interest review with no objections and carry the support of staff. We will be handling items 2C by itself first. And because we have an above average number of page 2 items this month, I will not be reading every single word that's on the agenda in front of you. I'm going to try to be a little bit more brief. Item 2C, City of Newport News is requesting authorization to construct a new marina facility at Menchfield Marina, adjacent to Deep Creek and City of Newport News. The new marina is comprised of 3 new floating piers with all of the dimensions and finger piers you see before you, for a total of 70 wet slips, and we are recommending approval of the project as proposed. One other thing is, this was carefully coordinated with the Corps of Engineers because there is a minor encroachment into the federal project channel, and the Corps is on board with this project. We'll recommend approval, sir.
Any questions from the commission? Bill? Is there anyone here, a representative for the applicant present that wishes to speak? Being said, anyone in support of this project wishes to speak? Anyone that opposes this project that wishes to speak? That being said, matter before the commission.
I would make a motion to approve page 2, item C.
All right. Second. Motion made by Mr. France, seconded by J.J. Minor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Carries. Thank you, Randy.
Mr. Commissioner, I have to abstain as well.
Mr. Erskine abstains as well.
Is that one abstention, sir?
Two. All right, Mr. Owen, we're back on track.
All right, for the balance of the items, we'll begin with item 2A. The Lane Construction Corporation is requesting authorization to construct a bridge crossing over Scott Run as part of the I-495 Express Lanes Northern Expansion Project in Fairfax County. We will recommend an approval with our standard in-stream conditions and a condition that wherein the permittee shall implement the protective strategies that are necessary to protect the threatened wood turtle as directed by the Department of Wildlife Resources. Item 2B, Amherst County Service Authority is requesting authorization to install a 500-foot-long rock revetment along the northern bank of the James River near the James River Heritage Trail in Amherst County. We will recommend approval with our standard in-stream conditions and a time use restriction for in-stream work from April 15th through June 15th and August 15th through September 30th in a year to protect endangered mussel species. Going on to item 2D. Kinder Morgan Operating LP is requesting authorization to dredge approximately 266,700 cubic yards of state-owned submerged land to maintain depths of minus 55 feet at mean low water for piers 9 and 10 at their facility along the James River in the city of Newport News. We recommend approval with the standard dredging conditions and a dredging royalty assessed at 60 cents per cubic yard for a total of $160,020. Item 2E, Columbia Gas Virginia is requesting authorization to install a natural gas pipeline beneath Paradise Creek in the city of Portsmouth and also beneath Blows Creek and St. Julian's Creek in the city of Chesapeake. This is all within the St. Julian's Annex for the Navy. We're recommending an encroachment royalty of $1,494 for a total of 498 linear feet of subaqueous crossings. Item 2F, the Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek is requesting authorization to place 14,000 cubic yards of suitable sandy material dredged from the federal Little Creek Channel into scour holes at piers 11, 12, and 13 at their base, Little Creek Amphib Base in the city of Virginia Beach. The material will be capped additionally with armor stone to protect those pier structures. We'll recommend approval. Item 2G, one footnote on item 2G. The city's permit was about to expire. The need to maintain the inlet is paramount. So the public notice for this project will expire this Thursday. Barring no protest received, then we think it's okay to proceed today and not issue the permit until Friday. If a protest is received, we would have to bring it back to you next month. But it's for the balance of the items, all the public notices have expired. So for the city of Virginia Beach, it's requesting authorization to maintenance dredge the Rudy Inlet Federal Navigation Channel connecting Lake Rudy and Lake Wesley to the Atlantic Ocean in the city of Virginia Beach. Dredging will occur either by hydraulic or hopper dredge methods on an as-necessary basis with sidecast dredging utilized as an emergency measure. We recommend approval with the standard dredge conditions and the previous sidecast dredging special conditions. The last two items on the agenda are titled Wetland Cases, where you're serving as the default Wetlands Board for King and Queen County, who rescinded the Wetlands Ordinance. And both of these are adjacent properties in the same neighborhood. Item 2H, William and Maria Littoral are requesting authorization to install a 100-foot-long stone revetment at their property on Courthouse Landing Terrace along the Mattapony River in King and Queen County. Their adjacent neighbor, under item 2I, Christopher and Janice Gordon, are requesting to install 200 linear foot of revetment in the same neighborhood along the Mattapony River in King and Queen County. In both cases, a tidal wetlands permit is required by this board. You're serving as the default wetlands authority for that county. Some footnotes I've added. Both of these properties are located adjacent to each other along an approximate 15 to 20 foot high bank, steep bank, that is situated approximately 65 to 70 feet from the existing houses. The steep bank and nearshore conditions do not favor the installation of a living shoreline treatment. Nearby properties are similarly protected with riprap revetments that were previously authorized by the former King and Queen County Wetlands Board. Both our staff and them have reviewed the proposals and support the projects as requested. So that concludes the page 2 items, sir, minus item 2C. I'm ready for any questions you may have.
Any questions from the board, Mr. Owen? Mr. Tanker?
With regard to the City of Virginia Beach permit, on the maintenance dredge, you mentioned, it mentions it here that they are going to release it in a near shore beach area, or just out into the open.
Sure. So for decades, beginning with my tenure here 30 years ago, this inlet has either been dredged by the city, by the Corps, or both. They routinely pump the material, bypass it right onto the beach with hydraulic lines. When the Corps comes in, the city's dredge is too small to operate outside the protection of the jetty, or actually even in the jetty itself, it will swamp. So when the Corps comes in, a lot of times they have the hulls that, the dredges that can actually split their hull open, and they'll come in shore just off of the beach, and they'll open up and steam along, and they'll discharge the material that way. The third measure, depending on which of the Corps' dredges make it in, or the commercial dredges that bid through the Corps process, can actually side cast occasionally. You can have one northeast that closes that inlet overnight. So all three practices have been the historic practice of bypassing that sand. And I guess I'll add one last thing. Back in the 80s, there was a NEPA document that looked at the creation of the inlet and the sand trap that functioned to not only protect the beach to the north, but the way that the inlet is designed, it also keeps a certain beach profile in front of the Croatown properties to the south. So this is nothing more than the Corps' permit and the city's permit expiring and them coming back for the same authorization.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Further questions? Thank you, Randy. That being said, is there anyone here that wishes to speak on this, on any of these matters, these item 2 matters, other than item 2C? Please proceed. Just state your name and raise your right hand, please.
Robert Hopkins, Executive Director, Amherst County Service Authority.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir. And I just want, if you all have any questions about the reasons for the project we want to do on James River, I can give you more information. I don't want to overburden the meeting, but I just want to make sure that you all have all the information you all need to approve this permit application.
Any questions for the gentleman on the board?
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak on any of these matters? That being said, matters, all item 2 matters are before the commission. Mr. Tanker,
I'll move to approve all these page 2 items except for C.
have a second? Second. Second by Mr. Branson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? One abstention. One abstention, Mr. Minor abstains. All right, thank you. On the consent agenda items, I don't guess we have any of them, do we, Randy? No, sir. Item 3, no. Thank you. Any reason for closure?
No, sir.
We're moving right along. Stephen Cole, item number 5. Mr. Johnson, how are you doing?
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, Mr. Stephen Cole is requesting authorization to install an 18-foot by 30-foot open-sided boathouse on a statutorily authorized private pier along the Ware River at 5384 Sherwood Lane in Gloucester County. The project is protested by an adjacent property owner. Here you can see the Ware River, which is a tributary to Mobjack Bay, which then opens up into Chesapeake Bay. This is an aerial shot of the shoreline in the immediate area of the applicant. There are 4 piers in the immediate area. Mr. Cole's existing pier now, with this circle showing where his boathouse is going to go. The protestant's pier here in yellow and his property to the left. And I'll just note that this pier here, two properties down from the applicant does have a boathouse on it as well already. The applicant does own both of these parcels here, and I'll go into a little more detail on that later as to how that pertains to the project. These are the plan view details of the boathouse, which will be going into the existing slip here. There is some other work going on with the pier, but all that is statutorily authorized under the Code of Virginia, including a 100-foot extension and doing some work on the finger piers around the proposed covered boat slip, and also replacing a section of the main stem pier itself. This is a cross-sectional view of the proposed boathouse. You'll note that he's offering a hip roof, which will help reduce the profile of the boathouse itself, thereby reducing any impacts to the view shed. Again, 30 feet wide. The boathouse will be 10 feet off of the deck of the platform, extending up to 14 feet. And this is a ground shot of Mr. Cole's pier, the existing boat and boat lift he has there now. And this is just looking further downstream. You can see the boathouse I pointed out to you earlier, which is also a hip roof. Now, this is a little tricky of a shot here. I took a panoramic just so you can kind of get a view of the entire shoreline from the property line between the protestant and the applicant. Here you can see the protestant's pier and the applicant's pier. So this is really just a straight shoreline, just kind of looks a little curved because I took a picture coming across like that. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Cole does own two parcels here, and his pier is located close to the property line. This is the existing boat slip where he's going to put the boathouse. You see right now the boat slip is perpendicular to the pier. In the protestant's letter, he did ask that they reorient the pier so that the boathouse so it's parallel to the pier. He thought this would reduce the visual impact of the boathouse on his view shed. Staff did discuss this with the agent applicant about reorienting. The response was that they're not proposing to replace this section of pier, and they felt like this would add an unnecessary expense to it. And given the fact that Mr. Cole owns both of these properties and the pier and the boathouse is opening up into this parcel here, staff didn't feel that that was necessary to reorient the boat slip. So we felt like it was appropriate to bring it to you today for consideration. I will now read the summary recommendation to you. We also did receive a letter of support from Mr. Burnett. That letter's in your packet, along with the protestant's letters of protest. And in summary recommendation, Section 28.2-1203A5 of the Code of Virginia provides statutory authorization for private piers meeting certain design criteria. This section also authorizes construction of open-sided boathouses measuring 700 square feet or less, which are designed to cover a single boat slip or lift, provided they are not objected to by the adjoining property owners and are allowed by local ordinances. In this instance, since Mr. Vu is protesting the boathouse, a VMRC sub-acres permit is required. Staff understands the protestants' concerns regarding their view shed. However, staff notes that the pier and proposed boathouse are located centrally on the applicant's property. The boathouse will be approximately 350 feet away from the shared property corner with the protestant, and the applicant has minimized the vertical profile of the roof by changing to a hip roof design. Therefore, staff believes the installation of the boathouse will minimally impact Mr. Vu's view shed from his property. Accordingly, after evaluating the merits of the project against the concerns expressed by those in opposition to the project, and after considering all the factors contained in 28.2-1205 of the Code of Virginia, staff recommends approval of the boathouse as proposed. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from the board? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Is there anyone, the applicant or representative of the applicant that would wish to speak on this matter? Mr. Nykirk, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
I like the new digs down here. Chip Nykirk, I'm with now Knee Deep Shoreline Consulting, here to represent Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole is also present today, if you have any questions for him. If I learned anything while I was here, brevity is key, so I'll try and keep this very short. Do you need to swear me in?
Yes, please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. Mr. Cole is proposing, as Mike said, to construct a 30-foot by 18-foot open-sided boathouse. The project is designed to meet the statutory authorization for private piers. Unfortunately, since the adjoining property owner did object to the project, it doesn't meet the code exemption. After receiving a copy of the letter of objection, Mr. Cole attempted to discuss the matter with his neighbors in person and by phone and email. He eventually received an email basically stating that they felt the matter should be resolved by VMRC, and this pretty much effectively eliminated any further conversation on minimizing the impacts. Mr. Cole was really hoping to discuss the matter with his neighbors, really to understand their objection. They seem intent on turning the boathouse, actually a roof, it's an open-sided boathouse, so it's just the roof, so that it was parallel with the pier. But as you can see, actually this picture shows it just as well, he's going at an angle over here, and I'll show you in some slides that I have. Turning the boathouse that way, if anything, might actually even increase the view obstruction that's there. Mr. Cole would prefer not to reorient the roof because, as Mike explained, this portion of the pier is likely to stay exactly as it is. There might be some pilings or something replaced, but right now he can access the pier from both the pier head that's out there and a finger pier that's behind. If he were to reorient the pier or the boathouse parallel with the pier, it would most likely have to go on the side closest to the neighbor, so he could access coming in and out of the boathouse, and it would require construction of about 48 more feet of finger pier around the outside of that new boathouse, so he could access both sides of the boat. And obviously, you know, he doesn't want to bear that additional expense, especially when we really don't understand how that improves the situation. Mr. Cole did revise his boathouse from a typical gable roof to a hip roof design. That does eliminate some of the visual impact. I do have a couple of slides I'd like to show you here to explain this. Let's see if I can get there. This is just showing that the boathouse was revised to the hip roof design. You can see that, you know, these areas are eliminated from the gable roof design, so that does improve the view a little bit. It's only 18 by 30, which is 540 square feet. The statutory exemption for boathouses is 700 square feet, so it does appear to be reasonably sized. Oops. This is what I was getting at when the view of from the neighbor's property is really at an angle. You can see, and that cross-sectional impact increases as you move this way. And that's depicted here in this image here. The red would be the impact on the view if it were reoriented the other direction. The blue lines here show it the other, and if you do measure it, it's actually more of an impact reorienting the boathouse. And this would be the finger pier that would be required to be built around if he were hoping to access both sides of the boat in the lift, which he would like to do. This is a ground shot from the shared property line towards Mr. Cole's existing boat lift. This is a view of both piers out there. This is the VU pier here. It's much further out. But as you can see, it's an expansive view regardless of whether or not an open-sided roof over that really detracts much from it. Really hard to say. And this is a zoomed-in view from the Coles deck out on the back in their backyard of the VU pier. Statutorily authorized piers and boat lifts associated with vessels obviously have some impact on view and from adjoining properties, but they are riparian right, and the property owners and are expected by waterfront property owners to have views. I mean, you know, the view here, there's no boat lift there, but, you know, it does impact the view. The Cole's proposed boathouse is open-sided and minimally sized. We do not believe the visual impact on the structure is significant, whether it is or is not oriented parallel or perpendicular. And reorienting the structure parallel to the pier would, however, add a significant expense to Mr. Cole. I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Cole is also here to answer any questions if you have any.
Anyone on the board have any questions for Mr. Nykerk? Thank you, Mr. Nykerk. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak in support of this project? Is anyone in opposition that wishes to speak?
I received an email from the protestant this morning. They were unable to attend due to illness today.
Thank you. That being said, the matter is before the commission.
Move to approve staff recommendation.
Motion to approve staff recommendations from Mr. Minor, seconded by Mr. Erskine. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Item number 6, PER properties. How you doing, sir?
Good morning, Commissioner, members of the commission. I am good, thanks. Pull this up here. That's a different folder than I go to. Got a bunch of them in there. Right, so PER Properties, which is Portsmouth Elizabeth River, is requesting authorization to construct 1,100 linear feet of steel sheet pile bulkhead, which will backfill 11,661 square feet of state-owned submerged land. They will then construct a 60-foot wide by 5-inch and 5-inch wide by 907 linear foot pier, and dredge approximately 111,834 cubic yards of state-owned submerged land. This will be to construct a ocean-going port facility for aggregates and grain at their property on 3991 Elm Drive, and that's on the southern branch Elizabeth River in the city of Portsmouth. This project is protested by an adjacent property owner. And a quick note to you all, I did replace the eval that's in your books. It's got some minor changes from the eval you received in your email, just making clarifications to the numerics on the dredging is higher, and then the royalty adjustments that we're just clarifying what was approved in 2012 versus now. And I'll speak to that more in my later slides. Otherwise, there was no other changes. So the property, again, is located at the southern branch Elizabeth River. You have the Jordan Bridge to the south adjacent, and then the railway there, and then this is the Norfolk Naval Shipyard property up to the upper left in your image there. You can see in the aerial here, and in the next one it shows a little bit better, this concrete cap to the south is an EPA Superfund site, the Atlantic Woods Materials site. It was creosote that was dredged and capped by the EPA, and that project was spanned several years. And that's going to be important in this project. So you can see that large area of concrete fill, if I put my pointer on, right here. And this is all formerly submerged lands of the Commonwealth. And there you can see where this is all concrete capped with a large bulkhead here. This is the PER property here, which is currently being used for aggregate mixing in the uplands. And then the pier and all the shoreline work will occur here on this shoreline. The plan view drawing shows the first thing you draw attention to is the blue is the dredge cut, where they're dredging to minus 45 feet mean low water. That's to match the existing federal channel that runs down the southern branch Elizabeth River. There is a bulkhead that will run the property. This is wetlands area, which was permitted by the Wetlands Board, this dark blue shading, and this is the extent of the current shoreline. A bulkhead will cut across here, so in some areas they'll have a fill of submerged land, which is indicated here, and in some areas there'll be a gain of submerged land where they'll actually cut off their upland just to make a straight line for the property. The EPA wall is then bordered down here. They'll have a return wall from that proposed bulkhead that will tie into that EPA wall. And then the wharf will be open pile, that 60-foot wide wharf by 907 linear feet, directly in front of that bulkhead, and that's where the ships will then moor up to for loading. So this property, I should say the adjacent properties are currently the subject of litigation of Dixon Company LLC, which is the protestant, versus the Commonwealth. The subject of that lawsuit is the property lines of these areas that were filled by the EPA Superfund site. So this is a drawing we received from the Office of the Attorney General last year that shows the adjacency, which are former submerged lands that were filled adjacent to the Dixon Tract, which is the protestant here, now has filled lands in front of it, as does the Jordan Bridge and the Atlantic Woods site down here. So those property lines are being disputed, and then the approximate pier location for PER is shown here, that basically is on their PER properties adjacency and north. So cross sections of the site show, you can see the pier, basically the box cut goes to the edge of the wharf, and then the slope will exist underneath this open pile pier. So you have the current shoreline and then the removal of the dredging, so you see the existing grade. The dredging will exist outside of underneath the pier. The existing shoreline conditions, it is an industrial shoreline. It's been used as such for hundreds of years in the city of Portsmouth. This is where the bulkhead will be. It'll kind of cut through the upland here where the shoreline ebbs out. This barge has been removed. It was in the process of being removed when I was on site, just for your information. And then at the very southern end of the property is where you can see the EPA wall, which has a substantial guards on it so that wall doesn't get bumped by anything. There's a lot of restrictions on offshore, distance that you can be from it. And basically, the return wall for PER property will fill this corner and then return right here. And the pier will extend from this point down in front of that EPA wall. So the impacts in summary, there's 11,661 square feet of submerged land loss. That's, again, the backfilling behind that bulkhead. There's a total of 111,834 cubic yards of submerged lands that will be dredged. The Portsmouth Wetlands Board did approve this project almost a year ago, September 1st, 2021. The core permit has been approved, and the DEQ chose to just modify their existing permit as there was minor changes. Your evaluation talks about what was permitted in 2012. There was a change basically in the design while they were waiting for the EPA flood wall to finish. Our permit expired, and they've come back now with a proposal that's basically a reduction in fill of submerged lands, but an increase in dredging as they pulled their wall further landward than that was originally proposed. So according to 28.2.1206B, the Code of Virginia allows an exemption for commercial facilities providing services relating to shipping of domestic foreign cargo. That just exempts them from royalties other than royalties related to dredging. So given that, the royalty for the subaqueous fill is exempt, but we are recommending a royalty for the remainder of the dredging that was not already paid for under the 2012 permit. So in 2012, they were authorized to dredge 59,923 cubic yards. The difference from that of the now proposed 111,000 cubic yards is a 51,991 cubic yard royalty, which comes out to $31,194 with that 60-cent royalty. So after evaluation of all the factors contained in 28.2.1205 and considering the protestants' concerns, we do recommend approval of the project with the following special conditions. I do note the commission does not have jurisdiction over the court, and the applicants have been advised and are aware that any court decision would supersede our permit, and they're willing to take that risk. So the following special conditions, the first three here, I won't read through them. They're in your evaluation. They're the standard dredging conditions. The last two are a little bit unique. We are proposing to allow maintenance dredging through the life of this permit on an as-needed basis, provided they give us 15 days' notice, and they include a current bathymetric survey and details on where that dredge material is going to go. And then we do request that they abide by their PER Properties Dredge Management Plan that is attached. They included that as a part of the permit, and that is just the plan that they'll contain and dewater their material that will be used for backfilling behind the bulkhead. So I know the agent and the protestant are both represented today, and I imagine they will present to you, but I'm happy to answer any questions off the bat.
Any questions from the commission? No. Mr. Tackett?
Yes, sir.
So no time of year restriction here?
No, VIM does not recommend a time use restriction.
Further questions? Is the applicant or representative of the applicant here wish to speak? Mr. Woodley.
We do, Mr. Commissioner.
How you doing, sir? Welcome. Obviously, I don't have to swear you in, but
Good morning.
good morning, proceed. I don't have to swear
You
you in.
know necessary? I'll be very brief. This is as Ben mentioned, this is a very heavily industrial site that has been, it's essentially what we call a brownfield site that we are redeveloping and bringing back into productive use. We expect the economic benefits to the city of Portsmouth to be very substantial, and we believe that we're very we believe there are not that many people out there that would take the kind of risk that we are taking to redevelop this property right immediately adjacent to the largest Superfund site EPA has on the eastern seaboard. The as has been also mentioned, this is a reapplication, a reissuance of a permit that was issued on a unanimous vote of the Marine Resource Commission in 2012. And the only thing I would like to mention about the protest that we received is that it is essentially the same protest, the same basis that was used by the adjacent landowner 10 years ago and was unanimously rejected by the commission at that time. Essentially, if you examine the matter, you can quickly see that any supposed claim to access to the Elizabeth River from the property, which is actually located, adjacent property located behind the PER site, is illusory and does not exist in the real world. But we are, as I say, we spoke to that claim and spoke to that protest 10 years ago. And we asked that the commission now reaffirm that. The delay that we've had is, that caused our prior permit to expire essentially was based on the work that the EPA was doing on their Superfund site, which is the Atlantic Wood product that I mentioned. They were dredging in the Elizabeth River immediately out offshore, and they did not complete that work until 2020. And that has kept us from enjoying the benefit of our prior permit and allowed that prior permit to expire in the meantime. And so we once again approached the commission, although we have made some changes to our design and as we would ordinarily have sought a mere modification of our prior permit, but we're asking for a entirely new permit, having been permitted now by DEQ, by the Corps of Engineers, and approved by the Portsmouth Wetlands Board. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any commissioner may have.
Any questions from the commission for Mr. Woodley? Mr. Ashton?
Has there been any comment from the controlling body of the EPA Superfund site? Have they had any comment on the project?
We have been in touch with and constant contact with the EPA as we go forward, and we have obtained a comfort letter from the EPA regarding the Superfund liability that contains a very substantial series of conditions that we must meet in order to not interfere with or incur any liability for the contamination that exists on the property. So we have been in really weekly, if not daily, contact with the EPA during the period of time that they were conducting their response action. Now that the response action has been completed, actually the Commonwealth of Virginia undertakes, DEQ undertakes the maintenance of the remedy, which is the sheet pile wall that you saw, and the cap. Under that cap is all of the contaminants and all of the poisons and all of the hazardous material that was taken from the dredge from the river. And so that we are now in, as I say, almost constant contact with the Virginia DEQ hazardous materials and solid waste section with respect to the management of that piece of property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question. You have a letter of support from Department of General Services, who basically controls that property with DEQ, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
We have yes, well, what we have is they originally expressed concerns about what we were doing and recently withdrew their expression of concern. So I don't think that they're in the business of offering letters of support.
Thank you.
We do have a letter of support from the South Norfolk Jordan Bridge, which is the bridge facility immediately to our south.
Is there any speakers in opposition to this project present who would like to speak? Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm Harry Dixon,
Are you,
on behalf of the Dixon Company.
Are you the attorney representing or a family member?
I'm the attorney.
Proceed.
Thank you, Commission. I think I'll be brief as well. Our objection is stated in our letter that's in your packet, but as was touched on by staff, the extent of the pier in relation to the bridge, we think significantly restricts the Dixon parcel. And I don't think anybody disputes that the actual property boundaries are disputed, but if you look at the plats, I mean, the dredge area plat shows the Dixon parcel extending to the old Port Warden line, and that's been considered the boundary for a long time. Now, of course, the EPA fill area, this Superfund project with the offshore sheet pile wall and fill and cap isn't resolved yet. We do have the pending litigation noted by staff against the Commonwealth. I think we have a different view of it than Mr. Woodley, but certainly it's out there. And there's a little bit of discussion about DGS. DGS, the Department of General Services, initially objected on similar, they objected in a way similar to the position we took. And at the end of the day, we're not so much objecting to them building a pier, it's the extent of the pier as it impacts the Dixon parcel. So our objection, and set forth in the letter, is the pier shouldn't extend so far south. And I think DGS was with us. Their position recently changed in the last month. I can't speak to why that changed, but certainly the pier extending so far south would limit access to our property. And of course, assuming that's resolved with the Commonwealth. So that's our position. I think it's straightforward in the letter, but glad to answer any questions or concerns you may have with respect to our position.
Any questions for Mr. Dixon for the commission? There being none, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Woodley, would you like to have rebuttal to that? Any comments made by opposition?
No, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, sir. Matter before the commission. So, Mr. Tanker.
I move to approve this PER Properties application as requested.
Do I get a second? Second by Mr. Minor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, good morning. Let's turn our attention now to Northumberland County. Rebec 2 LLC is requesting authorization to dredge approximately 1,000 cubic yards of bottom material, install a new bulkhead, travel lift, and an access pier to facilitate the construction of a replacement travel lift adjacent to an existing marina situated along the Great Wacomico River. And you're not seeing anything up there. Okay, hang on a minute. Thank you. I'm just above the 8-track stage, just a little bit, just a tiny bit. Okay, so I will continue. This marina facility is located along the Great Wacomico River in Northumberland County. The project is protested by a nearby oyster hatchery operator. Let's see, this one. We're doing it. Here's the location. And no, laser pointer. Tiffany, Rebec 2 LLC is effectively Tiffany Yacht. And Tiffany Yacht has a couple of holdings in this area, but where the travel lift facility is right here. And this is the boat yard, and these were provided by the applicant. This is the area that's going to be dredged, stippled, and you'll hear more about this in a few moments, but I'd like to take a moment to show you the existing travel lift pier located here. That pier is in desperate need of being replaced. Rather than suspend travel lift operations at that site, they've elected to go immediately south of the travel lift. That's there now. But in order to do that, in order to get the necessary 8-foot depth, they need to dredge. This picture, while a little bit light, kind of shows you what's on the ground right now, and I believe this is page number 5 in your book. But I just wanted to give you an idea that this is the existing concrete pad. There's a travel lift bay here. There's a runway and a dock right next to it. And I'll be referring to an existing bulkhead, which is right here. I've taken the liberty of placing it in green. That will show up on a number of drawings sort of as a reference. There's basically going to be two sorts of operations going on here. First, they're going to, most likely, they'll build the sheet pile bulkhead, and then they need to dredge, and they'll construct the remainder of the travel lift. So I'm going to discuss a little bit the dredging. They intend to create necessary depth at the travel lift slip right here by doing what is referred to as zonation dredging. And in this way, in this fashion, they will create the 8-foot depth, and they will dredge in the vicinity of the newly constructed wall, which is going to go in right in this location, and then they will calve off the sides of the bank of the silty material and allow it to repose. And the purpose of this zonation dredging is to avoid, once they get up here to the -2-foot contour, to avoid impacting the adjacent upland. And that's mean low water right there. So what you see here, I've shown you here are the ambient depths, 2 feet, -4 feet, -5 feet, -7, and then -8. So they're consistent with our dredge guidelines that say they're within a foot of the ambient contour, 8 foot out here. Here's a view. Oh, before I do this, I'm going to kind of flip your head around a few ways. If you look here, this is section AA. And so when I go here, this is the cross-section AA right here. So what you're doing is you're almost like you're looking at the project all the way from the downstream property. This is how they're going to work. So it'll be nice, it'll be deep up toward the new bulkhead with no impact to wetlands, and then it will taper out. So when they're right down here at the far end, you're not taking any material, appreciable amount of material. And now the next one I want to show you, and I'm not going to get into every single one of these, but now where we are is right up at the head of the travel lift bay where most of the dredging is going to occur. Here's the new bulkhead, and they need to dig this area out. So there's where some of the larger excavation of material as they go deep into that bay. And the next transit, no way, the next one over here is you're stepping back a little further. You're halfway in the wet slip now. So they have a little bit less material. And now where in this particular, you'll notice that I haven't used any green here. Now you're outside the lift altogether in the deeper part of the water. And here we're at the very end, the very, very tip. The material is going to be offloaded from, it's going to be dredged. It's a barge operation. They're going to put the dredged material on a barge, dewater it. They're going to take it, the barge is going to come into the existing travel lift. They're going to offload it in watertight trucks, and they're going to take this to Surprise Hill, to a offloading site that has a very good pair of boots that I lost up there. Anyway, and they're going to deposit it there, all the material. It's where Ampro and Omega, and once the stuff gets on your boots, it doesn't come off. So anyway, now here's the construction phase. They're going to build this new bulkhead. And how they're going to accomplish this is they're going to shore up, they're going to remove the deck, they're going to shore up the existing timber bulkhead, then they're going to step out 2 feet and put in a sheet pile bulkhead. And then eventually it's going to be concreted over. So that's the green that you see here. That'll be the 142-foot long sheet pile bulkhead. In order to bring the ships, well, I mean very large vessels around and into the launch area, they need to step out beyond mean low water, and they're going to need to fill 573 square feet of subaqueous bottom. Part of the reason is there's a structure up here. There's a building up here, so they got to get the travel lift around and the boats around and maneuver them so they can go and be launched. Another construction phase here, of course, is the necessary 60-foot steel travel runway and the 60-foot access pier. The runway is it's almost like a steel gutter. And I'll show you in a moment, the travel lift goes down and it runs down this gutter, this trough. And there's the travel lift right there. That's the one that's existing. And this is concrete here. Note that pleasure boat right there, because it's going to show up in the next one. All the new work is going to be over in this direction off the slide. So there's that travel, the pleasure boat. This dock section is going to be removed, but the bulkhead that's underneath it's going to remain, and they're going to pound down new piles and build the new bulkhead over this way. Now what I've done, the next picture I'm going to be stepping to my left. So now there's the bay. That's where it's all going to happen, right there. And now where I am is I'm behind the travel lift altogether, and I'm looking down as well as I can. And that's the far right-hand side. That's actually going to be the corner of the bulkhead, the new bulkhead. This is what the shoreline looks like right now. And of course, they'll need to come out some. in order to get that straight-in shot going into the travel lift. And that's where the fill, but it's inboard of that stop. It will not impact those adjacent wetlands, and the Northumberland County Wetland Board did approve it, as did the Board of Supervisors, of course. Now, let's turn our attention now to the issues that were raised by the protestant. The protestant's the owner and operator of Sapidus Farms, and his objections are, and his name is Mike Minyak, and I'll read them quite quickly. The hatchery is located downstream of the boatyard, across the Great Wacomico River and up Typers Creek. This is a straight line distance of over 3,500 feet. And he's concerned about heavy metals getting into and causing oyster mortality during his operations. He's also concerned that it'll impact his nearby oyster lease. And his oyster lease, his closest oyster lease is 2,137 feet away. Incidentally, the immediately adjacent oyster ground leaseholder had no objection, and we have on file her approval of the project. She's all in favor of the project. And the other two adjacent property, oyster ground leaseholders, they have no objection either. So specifically, I mentioned the heavy metals, possible contamination and may result in mortality at his oyster hatchery. Mr. Maniak suggests that a turbidity curtain be deployed around the dredge and around the dredging area, and further that nearby oysters be sampled before, during, and after operations to monitor any heavy metal uptake by oyster stock. The protestant also suggests that dredging operations be conducted in October and November when his hatchery isn't in operation. VIMS has commented that, gives a brief history of that this is an industrial site and has been one since 1934. The additional bulkhead and structures are unlikely to significantly increase the environmental impacts of the existing boatyard. These could be minimized if the existing travel lift was rebuilt in place. However, we've already discussed that. That's a tremendous burden on the shipyard because they'd have to basically close down any launch and recovery operations. They noted, as did the applicant, that there is a mixture of both sand and clay, and VIMS noted the proximity of the creek, of Typers Creek being about a half a mile away. They said that a turbidity curtain could be used, and in fact, the applicant has agreed to deploy a turbidity curtain. But VIMS did not believe that the dredging was of a scale that would necessitate a time of year restriction. This, by the way, is what it's going to look like when it's all done. So what you have here, this pad, this is the existing pad. So this pad area will be enlarged, and then a little bit of fill here, and then the launch bay will be right in this location here. This is the new launch bay. There's the existing structures up there. This is all the new stuff right here. I would like to read the staff summary and recommendation into the record, please, if you don't mind. Commission staff is sensitive to the concerns raised by the protestant and believes the deployment of a sediment curtain during dredge operation is a prudent safety measure to reduce the potential for any resuspended heavy metals. Accordingly, after evaluating the merits of the project against the concerns expressed by those in opposition, and after considering all the factors contained in section 28.2.1205 of the Code of Virginia, staff recommends approval of the project with the standard dredge permit conditions, and a special condition that a turbidity curtain be deployed and properly maintained during all dredge operations. We also are recommending the assessment of a $600 royalty at a rate of 60 cents per cubic yard. And I might point out that since this particular operation is exempt from encroachment royalties, and that is codified in section 28.2.1206B. I'll stand by for any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Mr. France?
Yes. Has there ever been any kind of heavy metal contamination or anything to your knowledge in this area? And the reason I ask that because probably within the last 20 years, they built that new bridge there.
Well, as I'm not a toxicologist, I'm not a marine toxicologist, but I am aware that, and have been told repeatedly, that heavy metals are pretty much ubiquitous in this, and this has been around since 1934. But the difference, and my colleagues at VIMS, I'm certain could tell a great deal more about this, but the heavy metals get entrained in the sediment, and they're not in the water column. They're in the water column, but they're in the sediment. So if you stop the sediment from moving, they'll drop down. They don't generally mix with the water. If I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but you stop the movement of the sediment, you stop the movement of the heavy metals, and it would be contained, if properly maintained, it would be contained behind that sediment curtain. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah, because as you said, this is an industrial area.
Yeah.
And you know, since the 1930s, as you
Yeah.
stated. And, you know, with the new bridge and all there, and activity going on, we haven't had any problems.
Right. Now, I will tell you, Mr. Erskine is very well aware that the Great Comical River is a very productive hatch of oyster, and the applicant does plan to put one out. He was very quick right off the bat saying, if you feel that's necessary, we'll do it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Erskine?
I don't know that I have a question really, but I appreciate it, Mr. Madden. It is a highly productive river, probably one of the most productive rivers we have in the Commonwealth for seed oysters. Less so with mature oysters, but nonetheless a very, very productive seed river in the Commonwealth. So I do appreciate the protestant's concerns. I would note he's significantly distanced to the south from this site, but I like the condition for a turbidity curtain, you know, in there. So
Certainly.
Thank you.
I might add one more thing. Vim's comments did indicate that Sapidus Farms could deploy their own sediment curtain out in front of their, and further reduce it on their part. So,
Any further questions from the commission? Thank you, Mr. Madden.
thank you, sir.
Is the applicant or representative of the applicant present and wish to speak?
Applicant? I don't think I need to speak. He did a pretty nice job.
Well, good deal. Well, thank you. That makes it fast. We like that. Is there any speakers in opposition to this project? Present and wish to speak? That's even faster. All right, matters before the commission.
I move to approve staff recommendation.
AJ moves to approve.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Kellum. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Great.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'd like to turn your attention now to the western part of the state, where Virginia Electric and Power Company requests authorization to install one overhead fiber distribution line to existing poles within an existing right-of-way, a minimum 22 feet above a 69-foot wide section of Ivy Creek in Albemarle County. This is protested by an adjacent property owner. We are project's located just to the northwest of the city of Charlottesville. This is Route 29 running north and south, Interstate 64 running east and west. This application follows a similar application that came in 2021, where VEPCO requested the authorization to install a fiber optics line over 3 creeks in Albemarle County, one of which was the Ivy Creek crossing. We notified adjacent property owners, and Mr. Floyd Artrip, a property owner adjacent to the Ivy Creek crossing, he objected. Virginia Power worked with him and was unable to come to a resolution, So they requested that we drop the Ivy Creek crossing and go ahead and permit the other two crossings, which we did. VEPCO staff continued to work with Mr. Artrip, and they contacted me in July of this year, said that they had reached an agreement with Mr. Artrip and were applying again for the Ivy Creek crossing. So this is the location of the crossing in red, Ivy Creek. Mr. Artrip again objected to the project. He owns property just to the north and I believe to the south of the crossing of Ivy Creek. This is an overhead shot of the proposed crossing. The red circles indicate the existing poles on which the line will be crossed, attached, and the blue lines indicate the ordinary high water mark. So this is the area that's before you today, the 69 feet crossing above Ivy Creek. Another aerial shot. This shows Mr. Artrip's property, the Protestant, and a cross-section showing the existing poles on Upland and the crossing over Ivy Creek, 69 feet of Ivy Creek. As I mentioned, Mr. Artrip again objected to the crossing, voicing pretty much the same objections he had raised before. He is hesitant to have more equipment cross his property, as in the past they have done some rutting of his farm fields and his roads. This is an aerial, this is a ground shot of the crossing of Ivy Creek, the proposed crossing. The line will attach to these wooden poles, small wooden poles here, not the larger metal poles. This is looking the other direction. You'll see the small poles here that will be attached to cross Ivy Creek. These were supplied by Dominion Power. This is a photo provided by Mr. Artrip from a previous work on his property by another contractor, I believe. And you can see the rutting of his fields and his roadways. He raised a second objection that he fears that if we install the first fiber optics cable on lines that now only carry electric, that this will open the door for future fiber optics installations, which he does not want to see. And finally, he questioned whether the existing easement that Dominion Power, VEPCO, has allows for telecommunication lines. In response to that, Dominion Power sent me a 1984 right-of-way easement, which is included in your packet that shows that communication lines can be added to those poles. We corresponded with Mr. Artrip again and asked for if he would concentrate his objection to the 69 feet of the crossing of Ivy Creek, that the other objections were upland issues out of the jurisdiction of the commission. And he did send a second letter of protest citing similar issues, and then at 11 o'clock last night he sent his final email, which I'd like to present to you. The first 2 pages of which are the most recent, the rest is just attachments. So in summary, staff understands the protestants' concerns related to the access of private property and the history of upland damage caused by previous contractors' equipment. These issues are all outside the Commission's jurisdiction, and in fact, a standard condition contained in all of our permits states that the permit grants no authority to the permittee to encroach upon the private property of others, or the property rights of others. And a second standard permit condition in all of our permits states that the permittee shall, to the greatest extent possible, minimize the adverse effects of the project upon adjacent properties and wetlands and upon the natural resources of the Commonwealth. Had Mr. Artrip not objected, staff would have administratively approved this project. Accordingly, after evaluating the merits of the project against the concerns expressed by those in opposition, and after considering all the factors contained in Section 28.2, 1205A of the Code of Virginia, staff recommends approval of the project as proposed with a royalty in the amount of $207 for the encroachment over 69 linear feet of state-owned bottom at a rate of $3 per linear foot. The applicant is present and has a PowerPoint presentation he'd like to show you, a brief one. And I'm not sure Mr. Artrup is here. I've not seen him sign in yet, but he may be here. I'm not sure. And I'm glad to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Commission? Ms. Madden? Thank you. Is the applicant, representative of the applicant present and wish to speak, please? Please, state your name for the record.
Yes, his name is Matt Harwell.
Wait, speak in the microphone.
Matt Harwell, manager of broadband for Dominion Energy.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
So I will be very brief in my comments. Just wanted to provide the staff or commission a little bit more macro level perspective on why we're doing what we're doing as it relates to fiber. Fiber is somewhat new for Dominion Energy on the distribution side. Let's see here. And so I wanted to kind of briefly describe, again, the fiber initiatives that we have going on. So as it relates to key drivers, this really stems back to several initiatives, most notably the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Just as a reminder, that's a mandate that all regulated utilities, energy providers in this Commonwealth by 2050 will be 100% renewable focused, and all electricity will come from 100% renewables. An initiative that large doesn't happen by accident. We're working very hard right now to put the proper protocols in place and working towards that very aggressive goal that we fully support and will make happen. And a key component of that is fiber, right? Communications with the influx of distributed renewable generation is going to require communications from a multitude of areas. At the same time, in parallel, we're retiring our fossil generation fleet, and so we've got to continually bridge that gap, again, working towards the stated goals of the VCEA. And that sort of bridges us over to the GTSA, the Grid Transformation and Security Act of 2018. Think of that as a portfolio of a lot of different initiatives focused on modernizing our grid, transforming our grid to be able to compensate for the influx of distributed generation that we expect to see. And then finally, not to overlook this important aspect, customers expect it. Our customers expect clean energy, and it's becoming more and more on the forefront as the years go by. So again, installing fiber in terms of Dominion Energy is not a new thing. We've been installing fiber for many years on the transmission side. Somewhat new for distribution. We have 3 what I'll call fiber deployment initiatives going on right now. The grid transformation plan that I just mentioned, think of that as communicating between substations, between our assets in the field. The offshore wind project, for example, we've got to communicate from a control house out in the ocean to a substation on land. So all of our internal communications is covered under that program. The rural broadband program is somewhat of a new initiative you may have heard of. It's everything that GTP is, plus the ability for us to lease out dark fiber that we're not utilizing for internal communications to third-party internet service providers. And the whole goal there is to bridge the digital divide that currently exists in the Commonwealth. There are pockets of unserved areas, and it just doesn't make financial sense for the ISPs to, extend the line pretty far out to reach a couple customers. It just doesn't make sense. So by us installing middle mile and leveraging fiber that we're already putting up, we're able to bridge that gap and make it very similar to electrification 100 years ago. One thing I do want to mention, you hear lease payments, and that is commonly mistaken for additional income. The way that we are regulated, the lease payments actually go to offset the cost of install. Okay, so I want to make sure that is pointed out. And then finally, solar interconnects. We're seeing a lot of applications as it relates to hooking up solar, and part of that requires communication from the solar field back to our facilities. And again, this is more of a risk mitigation effort. This allows us to puts what's known as transfer trip. In case anything happens with the field, we're able to shift load and react accordingly. So again, just some of the elements of grid transformation. You'll see telecommunications listed in the smarter category. But if you read through some of the other initiatives, most of those involve some form of communications, which is fiber. You can't have a self-healing grid, for example, without fiber, without communications. So again, fiber is embedded in all of the elements, or most of the elements of grid transformation. Again, all focused back to the Virginia Clean Energy Act. All right, and just a key component of the way we're going about installing fiber, we're putting everything, as Mark mentioned a second ago, on existing facilities. We're not going out and building new pole lines. We're installing it in the supply space, which think of that as the top third of our poles. And it's exactly what you see here in terms of what it looks like. It's tagged yellow, and again, on existing infrastructure. So minimal impact to existing properties as it relates to deploying fiber. Again, I won't read through the benefits. We touched on most of these. But one thing I do want to point out is all of these projects are reviewed and approved by the staff. You know, that it's a very focused effort that we have to prove is prudent to our ratepayers. So I do want to make sure that aspect is not overlooked. And again, I tried to fly through that as quickly as possible. Any questions?
Any questions from the commission? Thank you. Is any other speakers in support of this project present? But any speakers in opposition present wish to speak on this project? No opposition. That being said, matters before the commission.
Staff recommendation.
Mr. Minor, move to approve staff recommendations. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Branson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Number 9, Mr. Stagg, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Doing great.
For the record, I'm Ben Stagg, Chief of the Shellfish Management Division. This is a public hearing related to oyster planting ground application received from James G. McBride and James E. McBride, 2017-161. The original application requested approximately 64 acres within the Rappahannock River in Middlesex County. It was subjected to a public interest review, and we did receive 2 protests from nearby property owners. This morning, I got an additional letter in opposition, and Monday, I got one from an existing protestant who wanted to be here, had knee surgery and can't be here today. So both those letters are on your desk. They're not the Menhaden letters, they're the other 2 letters. And I'm going to cover a little bit what's in both of those, but they will be made completely part of the record per both of the protestants' requests. So again, oops, need a PowerPoint mode here. So as you'll note, there's 2 applications on the agenda today. They do adjoin each other. The first one we're looking at is the one in the Rappahannock, so it's the one to the east here. Shown here, this is Harry George Creek, and obviously the Rappahannock, existing lease to the offshore and public ground offshore of that. I put this photo in for historical perspective. This is aerial photography we have in conjunction with VIMS from 1937. Most of the state was flown in 1937, and it's pretty interesting to go back and look at these photos. But what I wanted to show here is that this peninsula was connected at one time here all the way down in a small island here. You'll see the remnant of the island in the subsequent photos. The protestants' objections include the shallow nature of this area in general, which it is. It's very shallow. So as you can see, there was no direct opening to the Rappahannock except through this area in the past, historically. And you can see remnants of a channel there. So any activity within the creek that came out boat-wise would have had to go out this way. This is eroded away over time. Of course, it remains very shallow here. But you'll also see something's happened here with this channel in subsequent photos, so that really probably the only way to get out at low tide from Harry George Creek is to now go out where this peninsula used to exist. So we did receive the application back in November of 2017. We did subject it to our normal public interest review. We did receive 2 objections back in that time frame from a Mr. Randy Revercombe and a Mr. Harper Alexander IV and Catherine Alexander. Generally, they expressed their concerns that leasing this area, whether it was suitable for shellfish propagation at all, and also about navigation impacts related to the shallow nature of the application of the area. We do consider each lease application on a case-by-case basis, and we consider the requirements of both the Code of Virginia and the Public Trust Doctrine. The use of cages and nets for shellfish propagation, which is allowed on leases up to 12 inches high, has resulted in increased public awareness of such activity and highlighted the need for a comprehensive review of such applications related to shellfish aquaculture propagation. Such leases, when they're in populated areas, raise additional issues regarding the public trust lands to include user conflicts, property values, aesthetics, navigation impacts, and whether the bottom is suitable. Stewardship of public trust lands while weighing the public and private benefits versus the detriments requires a balanced approach to review of each application on an individual basis. I will note that the applicants here did note on the use plan questionnaire, which we require all applicants to fill out, that they did propose to grow oysters on this proposed lease, both by traditional on-bottom planting methods and possibly use bottom enclosures, which they would be allowed to do if the area is leased up to 12 inches high. Of course, they would have to be properly marked with some signage and the perimeters marked of any area where they did intensive enclosures, and they could not put them in a way that would more than minimally adverse navigation. So this is a little closer view of the actual surveyed area. This is a much smaller footprint than the original application. The original application was approximately 64 acres, and what you see here is just a little over 48 acres. A couple things just a little hard to see in this photo related to navigation. This is the Revercombe protestant's property, and he owns this entire point, is my understanding. It's hard to see in this photo, but there was a pier here at one time. There's some remnants of it. Subsequently, Mr. Revercombe built a longer pier here. It ends right there, and it's about 150 feet from the end of the pier to the lease line. There is no corner right there. The next corner is up here. So we did stay off the shore here considerably versus what the applicant originally asked for. The applicant had asked to go, fairly close to shore and a lot of this area in this spot here as well. Because of the shallow nature, we determined that, and it's still shallow as you get out in this area as well, but that leasing this area probably would not be the best idea related to access for these people to the north. So we stayed offshore here some as well. And down here, there are breakwaters on this property. It's hard to see, but there's a V-shaped breakwater here, and it's about about 60 feet offshore to that corner. And there are some sandy beach areas here. The Revercombes did indicate concerns about use of the nearshore area as well as the shallow nature. We felt that at least we hope we adequately addressed some of those concerns by staying a little further offshore with the lease. Again, a little bit closer view with the acreage superimposed. So this is the proposed area as surveyed in the field. I do want to note Mr. Revercomb's continued concerns. So you do have the letter, and he apologizes for not being here today. And he states that he owns a 98-acre parcel, which is that land in the southern part of the photo, along the Rappahannock River and into Harry George Creek. He believes that the area is not well suited for the propagation of oysters, and he also has concerns about navigation and public safety. As he states that every inch of water matters in regard to navigating in and out of the creek, as well as boating for several hundred feet off the shoreline of the Rappahannock. He states he recently constructed a 280-foot pier from the shoreline and extensively studied the water depths out to 400 feet. At normal low tide, we have maybe 22 inches of water at 300 feet out and 26 inches at 400 feet. It doesn't drop off as you might expect, he says. You may find occasional pockets of 30 inches at the 500-foot line, but it's not average or normal. In winter, when there are shallower tides, some of these waterway areas can be reduced to as little as 12 inches. He believes that leasing this area might impact his ability to navigate safely to his dock. Also, he says even just planting oysters on the bottom might reduce the depth and could be hit by boats or props. And cages should never be allowed, according to his letter, because they may get dislodged, and this is not a proper spot for those. Fishing areas might be reduced, and fishermen who navigate the area may be impacted. He also notes that he accessed waterfowl hunting on his property, and that he believes leasing this area and the subsequent application in Harry George Creek might adversely impact that as well. Therefore, he states he believes that the commission should not approve the lease as requested. So staff concedes that some extremely shallow areas do exist, particularly at the mouth of the creek, but they were not included in the surveyed area. We also maintain a distance of approximately 70 feet from the southern end and about 150 feet from the existing pier that's currently under use. And again, as I noted in a historical photo, there was a peninsula here and access was this way. Well, as you can see now, the dynamic has changed, and this island is kind of serving as a offshore breakwater to some degree, and you can see that it's shoaled in considerably here, which is probably why Mr. Revercomb moved his pier down here, because the access here became problematic. So except at high tide, and my surveyor has confirmed this, that you probably can't get out this way at all at low tide. You're blocked by this sandbar. Mr. Revercomb should still be able to access his pier, we believe. Even if cages are put on this lease somewhere, they cannot be placed in a manner that would preclude him from getting back and forth to his pier and out into the river. And again, it doesn't appear that this area here, the same thing, couldn't block access for anybody that lives in this area of the creek as well. The second letter of objection we got is from a property owner on the north side, and that's the Baldwins, and that was received this morning. I'm going to run through their letter fairly quickly, but do want to hit some points that they stated. They do note that they own a river house at 387 Point Breeze, which this is Point Breeze. There are 3 piers here, one here, and a small one you can hardly see right here. I'll talk more about them in the next application, which is in the creek. But all protestants here protested both applications. He notes as a father of 4, he wants to continue the tradition of river life with his family. This river house is directly adjacent to the proposed grounds. It's more adjacent to the other one than this one, but they're both nearby. He did say he reached out to Virginia Marine Resources Commission and asked if oysters could be planted upriver from the boundary, and was told no. I didn't speak to him. I'm not really sure what his point is at that exactly. We do have leases in the area. As a result, he didn't make any further inquiries, he said. Since then, he's learned that commercial oyster farming consists of more than just using the bottom, and that cages or enclosures could be used for harvesting, and he has concerns about that in this shallow area. He notes, as the previous protestant, that Water depths in the area are less than 24 inches at times and even more shallow in the winter. He gives sort of the same information that Mr. Revercombe about the depths and how it stays shallow considerably offshore. He does note numerous boaters navigate within 50 or 60 feet from the end of his dock, including his family. Well, this lease is hundreds of feet from any of these docks, and I'll address that on a separate application in a minute. But so it doesn't appear to us that this application really fits into that 50-foot from his pier concern. But he continues to have concerns about just general safety and boat travel within the creek and out into the river. He also is concerned about any additional silt or deposits that might be a result from oyster farming in this area, and any silt that might be stirred up, particularly if cage aquaculture is used and power washing methods are used. And he has concerns about that, whether that would happen right on the lease or whether the cages would be taken further out into the water. We don't have any restriction on husbandry activities like that. And again, he also, and this came from him and his wife, I believe, they also continue to object and believe that this lease and the others should not be granted. So we did review all the objections we got initially and included these two we most recently got. We still believe what we've surveyed here is a reasonable compromise with this lease. It's a smaller area. We stayed further offshore. We stayed out of that previously area where the land was still connected and now washed away, and it is very shallow. And we believe this is a reasonable area that could be leased. So therefore, after careful review of the objections we received, modification to the survey area to try to address some of those issues, and after considering all the factors of 28.2603 and 28.1205A, we do recommend approval of the area you see shown here. This is the actual surveyed plat of 48.08 acres. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions from the board for Mr. Stagg? Mr. France?
Yeah, is there ever been any history of this area being used or leased?
Other than the lease offshore, I don't think we've ever had, I'm not aware of any lease that we've ever had in Harry George Creek. And I think historically, because it was kind of cut off the way it was, there probably wasn't. It is soft in there, and I'll address that more in the next application about the suitability of that lease bottom versus this one. But this bottom is very similar to the lease you see offshore. Okay. So that's why we think that much of this ground is suitable for oyster propagation, both on bottom and with cages. Not atypical of what we see on the Rappahannock along the shoreline. There's lots of leases this close to shore.
Okay. What kind of bottom is it, with clay or?
Well, my surveyor's here, and where's Kevin? Yes, sir. He may be able to give you a little more idea of the nature of this. I know he probes these some when he's surveying.
How you doing, sir?
All right, how are you?
Good, thank you. The bottom for this application is mostly sand. Hard
Mostly
bottom.
sand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and depth again, I'm sorry?
It's still pretty shallow on this one, but at low tide, I was getting ranges between 3 to 5 in the majority of the application.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stagg, is there a lot of people living on this creek, in this creek?
Well, Mr. Revercombe is the only, and you don't see up here, but there's really no other houses or anything up in this area of the creek. So Mr. Revercombe owns this entire point. And there are a number of houses here. Most of them face the Rappahannock. Right. There are 1 or 2 houses here that, like I said, 3 at least, that have piers here. There's a little one right there and right here. But I don't think there's really a whole lot of boat traffic in and out of the creek. It is pretty shallow, other than the people probably that live there.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Callen?
The original aerial you showed us from years ago showed the land extending out.
Yep.
Would that be the reason why the offshore lease didn't come further inshore and encompass this years ago? Is this like just become available?
No, this lease is not, it's old, but it's not real old. So this lease has been there for a while. I think when these people applied, they probably were getting this to dredge it. And it starts getting so shallow in here that dredging becomes a little more problematic because it's so shallow. Hopefully the applicants are here and they can address how they intend to use this, whether they intend to try to dredge it or use cages or both. But we have lots of leases in water this shallow, and we have other leases not right here, but along the Rappahannock that go up closer to shore. And I don't want to, supplant the wisdom of these people, but my guess is this was gotten in anticipation of dredging it. And it gets so shallow that they just didn't ask to go any closer to shore.
Thank you.
Further questions from Mr. Stagg? Mr. Branch?
Chief Stagg, thank you. The protestant and the applicant, they understand how any navigation incidents that occur, how they'll be handled by your staff, investigated and mitigated. They understand
Yes.
that.
And just to go on the record, so we'll state that again for the record, we do have a regulation that allows leaseholders to put bottom enclosures on a lease without any additional permit. So if you grant this lease, the leaseholder will have the right to do that on the lease. Caveated by, they can't be more than 12 inches off the bottom. They have to be non-toxic in nature. So they could actually be cages, they could be bags. But if they're put in any area that causes more than a minimal impact to navigation, and that's a little bit subjective term, but that's exactly what the regulation says, we will respond, both my division and law enforcement, and check, and the agency will make a determination whether they believe it meets that criteria or not. Any area with enclosures also must be marked per the same regulation. So if it's a subset inside of this lease, they must mark that subset area with some corner markers and some signage indicating that there's underwater structures, underwater aquaculture activity. They cannot put signs that say keep out or no trespassing. That is not allowed, because this is still public trust waters that can be fished over, navigated over, and used by the public.
Mr. Erskine?
And with regards to that, Ben, so that regulation cannot accommodate individual buoyed cages, is that correct?
That's correct. So we have a second regulation we call a general permit 4. So once you have a lease, again, this is only if you have a lease, you can ask to do cages more than 12 inches off the bottom, or if you want to mark more than just the end of the rows. So what we typically see people do is they put a stake or a buoy at the end of each row of enclosures and mark the area around it, or they can be the same corners. The bold area could be the outermost 2 arrays with poles to tether them, because they usually tether them with a line so they can pull them up individually. But if you want to mark individual cages in that line, or every third one, or whatever, that requires a general permit 4, which it is a permit. And there is a public interest review for that, and landowners do get a chance to comment on that and object specifically to that. The on-bottom less than 12-inch, marked only at the ends of the arrays, there is no additional public interest. Once the lease is granted, you adhere to that regulation, you're allowed to do it.
As a follow-up. So just as a follow-up, there are special conditions or certain conditions that have to be met in order to have cages on this lease that are below 12 inches. They have to
Yes.
abide by certain regulations. And if they chose to go above 12 inches, there's an actual permit and public review process.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And if they were to put them greater than 12 and not get the permit, that would be a violation of the other regulation that allows up to 12 inches. And of course, we would attempt to address that by getting them back into compliance or asking them to seek the permit to do beyond what that regulation requires.
Any further questions from the commission? Thank you, Ben. Is the applicant or representative for the applicant present, wish to speak? Please come forward. Please state your name for the record in the microphone and raise your right hand.
James G. McBride.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
I've been a Virginia resident for 73 years. I've been coming down here to this area for 60. Used to come down with Granddaddy. I've had cancer. I'm brain messed up.
Take your time, sir.
Take your time, yes, please.
You can't go nowhere on the river no more. Everybody owns oyster grounds, public, there's nowhere to oyster. I oystered up there 15, 20 years ago. Now, they tell me no. So, my grandkids can't do it. I'm not going to hurt the river. I love the river. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone here in opposition wishes to speak to this project? Please come forward. Please state your name in the microphone, raise your right hand.
Catherine Alexander.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
My name is Kathy Alexander, and along with my husband and 2 sons, we have about 40 acres bordering the north and the east shores of Harry George Creek, as well as we own the 2 islands and wetlands, the 2 islands that you see there on that picture, and the wetlands that front the Rappahannock River. I've been enjoying family times here since I was a baby. My father and grandfather purchased the property when my dad returned from World War II. My husband and I moved here full-time 5 years ago and enjoy continuing the tradition with our sons and grandchildren who love the river as deeply as we do. We fully support the statement submitted by others on behalf of the issue. We've all been in concert and talked and discussed, and the things from Mr. Revacombe and from also Mr. Vince Thornhill. I'm not sure whether you have a statement from him or not, but he also submitted a statement. Anyhow, I'm trying not to repeat things that they presented to you, but I do have a few additional comments. Creek access has always been an issue. Sometime in the 1980s, my dad had the creek dredged to address that situation, and you could see the situation in the previous picture, how narrow that channel was. I'm sure it's in your record somewhere, and obviously Mr. Stagg has found that information. At the time, we were using a channel that since is closed up, and that's happened in just a few years. Fortunately, another entry point has opened, and that is on Mr. Thornhill's map. Do you have that letter from him in your information packet, sir?
Mr. Stagg.
Mr. Stagg, are you familiar with that one? Vince Thornhill.
Mr. Thornhill sent me an email and said it was an attachment with it, but there was no attachment.
All right, well, I have that for you, and I'll be glad to give that to you. I do have that, a copy of that with me. But again, we lost that original channel, and we now have a new entry point, and we are concerned that, again, that could change in the future. There's no question in my mind that oyster production on the river would block our access, ingress and egress to the creek. We can only, as it is now, get in and out of the creek 3 hours before and after low tide. Because of that situation, we spend a lot of our recreation time in the creek, where an oyster lease is also of concern to us, and we feel that that would have impact on swimming and boating safety there in the creek. That addresses actually the second application. A favorite pastime is swimming, wading, or belly crawling, since it's so shallow, from our dock to one of the islands, and that was there at the former mouth of the creek. Soft mud is far more forgiving on boats, motors, and bodies than an oyster shell bottom, as many jet skiers and boat owners who have also enjoyed the creek with us can tell you. Several years ago, there was a development plan for the west side of the creek. When that did not work out for the owners, 9 families in the area got together and purchased 181 acres. Our sole intent at that time was to place the property in a conservation trust to protect both the land, creek, and community from any future development that would greatly change the pristine nature of the area, and that was accomplished. 4 of us had homes there on the creek, but 5 lived on the riverfront. Even though those on the riverfront were not directly affected, their dedication to the preservation of the creek and the community was such that they stepped up to make this happen. That dedication continues to this day, as evidenced by the documentation you have before you from the residents of the area. I'm not sure how Harry George Creek came to be designated as a potential site for an oyster lease. As a body, I understand that you on the VMRC are entrusted with weighing the public benefit of all of the various uses, as Mr. Stagg so aptly stated, and the demands that come along with our beautiful bay, rivers, and creeks. My concern is just because that there is the opportunity to have an oyster lease within Harry George Creek, should it happen, and I'm sure you know how I stand on this. My biggest concern on this particular application is that I really feel that it would impede our progress in and out of the creek. We do use it quite often. We have 2 boats, as does our neighbor, and it's very shallow. We go at low speed just to get out, and once we get out, as Mr. Revicombe indicated, there's about 300 feet of still very, very shallow water before we actually access deeper water and can speed up and get out into the river. So that is a concern that I have very much on my mind. Do you have any questions? What else can I add to that?
Commission have any questions for the speaker? Mr. Tanger?
Yes. So when you depart from your dock, can you give us some indication, maybe with the mouse, of where you're traveling across?
Yes, we are, well, let's see, I don't know how to indicate it on here, just.
Mouse right here.
Oh,
So
great.
see your little laser point.
Thank you. You did a great job of presentation.
Screen.
Okay,
So you can just move that around.
all right, okay. This would be,
Right at the edge of the marsh.
yeah, right, we would come in, this is our dock right here. And we come around and out there. Now, I'm not sure how many feet, Mr. Stagg, is this border of that from?
You have some
See,
distances on the
okay.
next application, but
Okay.
that's several hundred feet from the dock to where lease starts.
Well, but from right here to here, how much space is that? Because we do have to go way out before we can get any depth of water at all, and are concerned that any oysters there on the bottom, as Mr. Revicombe very aptly stated, every inch there is important for us to be able to get in and out of the creek. And I will reiterate that between, only 3 hours prior to high tide and after are we even able to get out of the creek. So it's a big concern for us that would be an impediment to our use to the river.
Any further questions?
And I think at some point, also, I think it was on Mr. Thornhill's letter, I do have a copy, I will be happy to share that with you if that would be appropriate. He requested that there possibly, Mr. Thornhill also, let me indicate where he is. Here we are. His pier, he has just rebuilt his pier, and it is right there, is that right, Steve? His pier would be about right there, it's new, and I don't think it shows up on this diagram. He's just put it in.
Some of the old pilings.
I understand, ma'am, but we'd have to receive the letter from Mr. Thornhill and his comments directly.
Okay,
So, I apologize for that, but we cannot take his comments from you.
even a printed letter that he's written? Okay, all right. Anyhow, that is what I wanted to say to you on that subject.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And-
Mr. Erskine?
Ma'am?
Yes,
Oh, or.
I'm sorry.
I just had a question. So when you indicated your egress from your pier
Yes.
was kind of at the northern part of the 48 acres, you go through that kind of cut and you would exit the creek across the northern part of the 48 acres?
That's correct.
So are you protesting the entire 48 acres, or?
Oh, no, I'm talking, we have, no, I'm protesting the part that would block us right here. If Mr. Thornhill has suggested, I'm sorry you don't have his letter, but Mr. Thornhill had suggested, would there be a possibility of, say, a 50-foot cut in that lease? to be sure, to adequately assure that we would be able to get in and out of our creek to the river. Is that a possibility?
Good.
So am I understanding that you're not actually protesting the entire lease application?
We are protesting, yes, we are. But barring that, that would be the primary, yes, we are protesting.
Okay, thank you.
Question for Mr. Stagg real quick. Mr. Stagg, if that's a navigation area, wouldn't that be off limits to putting cages right there, coming for egress and ingress?
So if the commission wishes, the commission can alter this in any way they want. Of course, the applicant may have something to say. I mean, we could certainly cut this part. I would not suggest splitting it into two pieces because this would be a really small area left to the north. But somewhere like perpendicular to this line where this island is, just stopping the lease there, and that should address their concerns, at least getting into the creek, in and out of the creek. And that area, this is a little under 50 acres, so you're probably talking about maybe 5 to 7 acres cut off the top.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, you wish to speak? Please raise your right hand. State your name for the record.
My name's Stephen Fornash.
You swear to tell the truth and the whole truth?
Yes, I do.
Please, for sake of time, try to state
I'll try to.
new stuff.
This is very important to us.
I get it. I'm gonna put you on a timer, so make sure you get it what you
Okay,
need.
I live at 425 Point Breeze Road, which is in the creek right there. I have one question for the VMRC. Have there been any studies that shows when these baskets or shells or whatever is put outside, is there a tendency to build up the silt on the other side of it? If this comes across that entrance right there with baskets or whatever, which I think baskets is ridiculous for safety purposes, if they put it across there and the water comes in and goes back out and drops the sand like it does a lot of times with riprap and all, it could close this area off we have. I'd like to say that I do agree with everything that my neighbors, Thornhill, Rivercombe, Baldwin, and Alexander have said. So I'm not going to repeat that. But I don't know of any studies, or y'all, I don't know if y'all do either, the effects of putting anything out there in front of an opening. I think it might have a tendency to close it over a period of time. Okay, as far as baskets go, 1 foot in the water. If you fall off a jet ski and you're 2 foot out of the water, I don't think it's going to make a whole lot of difference. You're paddleboarding, you're kayaking. This is a heavy used area through here, especially when the river's rough. People are trying to get in to use our creek for these recreational activities. Again, we can only get in and out 3 hours before high tide, 3 hours after high tide. It's been like it for 50 years. It's just been a different area we've been going out. This is the only area we have, and it's right at the top north area by the marsh. We have to stay within 15, 20 feet of the marsh to get out because I guess that marsh has held it in there so it didn't fill in. When we get out to the end of the land right there, we're never reading it over 3 feet of water. Now, you can test all you want to. When I go in my boat, we check it every time, and we can't get up for another 200 or 300 feet. They, and like I said, it's very difficult to get in and out just about any time. And as far as, like I said, the baskets, again, don't you think they're dangerous in a high activity area? Goodness gracious, I wouldn't want my, and you know, these jet skiers, they don't care about poles. They don't care about signs. Half of them don't have license. They just want to have fun. And a lot of their fun is coming right around there and zipping through our creek and zipping out. We had one flip over last year. We have a boat that came through and hit the riprap and tore the lower unit out and sunk right in there a few years ago. Let me move on. All the entrance and exit channels have been blocked except for this one that we're using now. The recreational use and safety is very important to us. The creek is narrow and shallow. That's more so on the next proposal I can address. So I'll be back.
Is, any questions for the speaker?
Any questions?
Mr. France?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm not familiar with this area, but I am familiar with places similar to this. And my question would be, does your channel move around at different times of storms or different things?
Well, like I said, we've had channels blocked off. At the one end down there, you showed where that peninsula broke and it came through. This is back in the 60s. Mr. Gurry put riprap trying to stop it in 80. That didn't do any good, and sandbags and everything else. That all now is opened up completely, except the riprap is still there. It's shallow on both ends where it's washed to it. The one end has closed off there by river combs, where we used to use all the time. You cannot go through there with a skiff, and you can barely go through there with a kayak. And then where we're coming out now, we've marked it so we know we can stay in the same place every time. But like, again, it's very shallow all through there. And we're getting accumulation from these islands washed into the creek we have there. But again, I just want to emphasize, baskets are dangerous. You can't explain to me any way it isn't. Thank y'all. I'll answer any other questions.
Mr. Tanker?
And where are you wharfing out from, sir?
Excuse me?
Where are you wharfing out from, sir? I didn't catch that.
Where am I coming out from?
Where's your dock?
Where's your
Well,
dock?
my dock is, how do I mark this?
Here, back up. Right there.
Right there.
Okay. Thank you.
Right there. And, we have to come out a little ways and then get back close to the marsh, and probably 200 yards to get out to the water. And Mr. Thornhill has put the dock in on the other side. The old dock went in about 250 feet that we lost in Isabel, but he didn't go out but maybe 50 feet because there wasn't any more depth out. It wasn't any sense in him going out that far and spending all that money because you won't go pick up with 3 or 4 inches of depth. And we're not dealing about feet here. We're dealing with inches. We can't afford to lose an inch. And again, when you fall off your jet ski and hit that basket, it don't matter whether it's 2 feet, 3 feet, or what, you're gonna be hurt.
Mr. Erskine?
So, did I understand you that, to say you've had channels and access points to the Rappahannock close off and open up in other areas
And
at
I
other
think Mr.
times?
Stagg yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, they've all closed off. It's just this is the one that didn't close off.
Okay.
And we sort of made it a channel.
As a follow-up, Mr. Commissioner?
Yes, sir, Mr. Erskine.
So, and there are no cages or there's no oyster production in the area at the time that these are closing off?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you.
May I just address quickly your question, sir? You asked if the
Ma'am,
channel was, oh, I'm
Ma'am,
sorry,
you,
excuse
you,
me, sir.
you already spoke, and I'm sorry,
Oh, okay.
you can't come up and down, that's.
Forgive
no.
me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else I can answer? I appreciate your time, and like I said, we'll be objecting to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be here. Anyone else wish to speak in opposition to this lease application? That being said, matters before the commission. Ms. Lawson?
I want to thank staff for their work on this. I think that they've done a good job addressing the concerns of everyone. And I sympathize with Mr. McBride and what he said about the difficulty in finding appropriate ground these days to grow oysters or clams, any shellfish for that matter. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but as we continue to move forward and we continue to have industry members look for new ground, we will continue to have user conflicts. And I think it's very important to remember that the recreational aspects are important, but so is the industry aspect. Virginia has a lot of identity as a Commonwealth wrapped up in oyster industry, just as it does in enjoying recreational benefits of the water. shellfish industry is supported by administrations across the board. As I've said before, we identify ourselves, Virginia is for oyster lovers. And it is a unique industry in that it provides environmental benefits in its own right and is sustainable. So I think it's important to remember that and to remember that there needs to be a balance. In this situation, I think the staff has done a very good job reaching a compromise, and so I would move to support staff recommendation.
So, before, we got a second. Is anybody else wants to comment?
Yes, I did.
All right, Mr. France, you have the floor.
If you could go back to the previous picture that you had. Yeah, you know, I'm in support of everything Ms. Luss said also, but I'm also in support of the Protestants here. And if it would be agreeable with the applicant, you know, maybe I'd like to cut this in half from that island down there, right
This
there,
way?
and go out towards the channel.
This way?
Yep, and,
Are you making a motion? Because we already have a motion on the floor.
No, I'm not making a motion, but I'm just making a suggestion. If the applicant would agree with it, but maybe cut that lease in half and, you know, maybe protect the people that live in this area a little bit. Because from what staff said, after they checked this ground, it's mostly sand anyway, which is not good for planting oysters. But a place like this is shallow and sandy may be great for cages, so I wouldn't want to see cages put in that upper area up there where recreation and going in and out of the creek and so forth would maybe interfere with it. So that's just a suggestion and part of the discussion.
I guess since there's a motion on the floor, I guess the part of the discussion is, do you want to alter your motion? You want to change your motion, or do you want to go forward with?
I appreciate Mr. Francis' comments, but as we discussed and Mr. Stagg told us, there are already provisions in place and safeguards in the event that there were to be cages placed in an area where it was found to be a hazard to navigation. So while I appreciate his points, I'm not sure that it's necessary.
All right, so motion stands as originally stated, except staff recommendations. Do I have any more comments? Mr. Tanker?
Yeah, I sympathize with Mr. France in this regard. I mean, I think one of the protestants testified that we're not talking feet, we're talking inches. You know, and people need to be able to wharf out from their waterfront property. People have been there for decades and generations in particular. I'm certainly sympathetic with them. I do believe that our industry, or oyster shellfish industry, is a strong industry in the state, needs to be supported, but I'm not sure that that support comes with the promotion of user conflict. And user conflict, I don't think, is positive for the shellfish industry. It doesn't make them any more popular with the politicians or people of the state. I, in that regard, would offer a substitute motion to break it in half at the bigger island and cut across. I feel like it's a compromise that is worth entertaining. Thank you.
So, any more comment for discussion? Mrs. Callum?
Just discussion, breaking it in half is still not going to give them their exit out to the,
Cutting across east to west from that island, so that the north section would be open and free to access.
I think we're going to have to proceed with the first motion and see if it carries, and then we'll go from there. Mr. Tanker?
Sure.
So I have a motion, Mr. Erskine?
I have a comment pertaining to the first motion and some of the discussion. So this original application, Mr. Stagg, was for 64 acres? Is that right?
That's the area that it was applied for. It stops right here. So it included all of this, in this area here, when we surveyed it, we didn't include any of this. And of course, we stayed a little further offshore here and a little further offshore here.
As a follow-up. So we're already at a compromise going to the 48 acres then, is my understanding?
Yes, it is a reduction, so it is a
Okay.
modified compromise.
And I thought there was testimony from the applicant that this area is so shallow regardless where oysters are propagated currently, that it's opening and closing. So it's a dynamic area to begin with. I certainly agree with the original motion and the fact that by law you can't impede navigation. So I think this should move forward as
Let's carry the first motion. I got a second to accept staff recommendations. Is there a second? Mr. Branson's a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed.
2 opposed. Mr. France and Mr. Tankard opposed. Motion carries to staff recommendation. Next item.
Okay. Part 2. So this is also a public hearing for oyster planting ground application, also received in 2017. This is from Robert James McBride. I believe they are related to the original applicants of the previous application. This is application number 2017-170. The original request was to lease approximately 9.36 acres in Harry George Creek in Middlesex County. And again, this was protested initially by 2 highland property owners nearby, and of course, we've received additional letters subsequent to that very recently. 2 of those letters, again, are on your desk. And we will proceed. Again, this application was received basically the same time as the previous application, on November the 30th of 2017. We did conduct our normal public interest review of newspaper notice, did notify some of the adjacent property owners, and that resulted in some protests. Again, the application is in Harry George Creek. It's kind of hard to see here, but it's a topo map. The 2 applications are shown. Pointer. This is the one you just heard. The other application is basically sort of the southern side of Harry George Creek. This is a little closer view with aerial photography underneath. Again, the application was on the south side and went up into both of these coves. Harry George Creek is very shallow. The bottom is generally soft, although there are some areas within this application that we believe have suitable substrate to grow oysters, and I'll explain that more as we go along. Again, this is that historic photo. I put this one in this one as well, just for context. The 2 little embayed areas are right here, and the rest of the application would run in this general area. And back in the day, this was the way to get out, and is not so much the way to get out anymore. Just to clarify from the previous application, whoever owned this land owned all of this and probably this island, and as this eroded away, that's why you have a property owner that owns property here and also owns the island, because that was a remnant of the old ownership. As land erodes away in Virginia, the state takes ownership once it falls below mean level water. So a disconnected peninsula like this can result in an island that's still privately owned. This is the actual surveyed area versus the applied for area. So again, just for the record, we do consider each lease application on a case-by-case basis. We consider the factors contained within the code and public trust doctrine. However, the use of cages and nets for shellfish propagation has resulted in additional public awareness of such activity and has highlighted the necessity for a comprehensive review when we receive such lease applications, where intensive aquaculture may be contemplated. Such lease requests in populated areas raise a number of issues, including public trust lands, user conflicts, property values, aesthetics, navigation, and suitable bottom types. Stewardship of the public trust lands while weighing both the public and private benefits versus detriments requires a balanced approach to review of such lease requests. Again, the applicant for this application also indicated that they propose to use both traditional on-bottom planting and possibly bottom enclosures that would be subjected to our, to be subject of our on-bottom regulation that allows such enclosures on a lease. We carefully assessed this area during the field survey. This is a very shallow area. We pretty quickly determined, our commission surveyor who's here, that those two embayment areas, while they do have some water at low tide, they're also very soft and are probably not suitable, so we did not include those in the surveyed area. The best part of this ground is the eastern side. This does have, according to the surveyor, some more suitable, harder substrate. And then there's pockets within this area that some of it's soft and some of it isn't. It's hard for us to just exclude those in a survey. So like a lot of leases that have, 50, 60% of the bottom is suitable and the rest is not, you still have to draw a polygon around the general area. So this is an area that we believed was reasonable based on the original request. It is a smaller area than the original request. It was for the south side of the creek. We stayed on that side, so there's really no direct impact to these piers as far as access in and out of the creek. Obviously, any bottom enclosures, if they were put on this, would have some impact on navigation, generally within the creek. Mr. Revercombe objects to this, very similar objections to the previous one. I will note additionally that he noted that he hunts this, does duck hunting, and that he believed leasing this area might restrict his ability to access the shoreline by boat. Just leasing it shouldn't have much of an impact on that for bottom culture, but obviously if structures are put there, there would be some navigation impact. However, again, they have to be marked and there have to be signage on them so that the traveling public, both Mr. Revercombe and anybody using the creek, would be aware of such enclosures. A little closer view, this is 9.36 acres. And I was in error when I said it was 9 acres applied for. The actual application was originally 21 acres. That included those two bays. But this was the final area. So this is a greatly reduced area again versus what was asked for originally. I put this on because of the letters we got just this week and I understood where these people lived from their letters to show the distances here. There was some comment about, boats coming within 50 feet of the dock, not just these people, but other boaters coming to visit. So you can see here, these two areas. The lower one is about 87 feet from this pier out to the lease line, and then this one is an even greater distance, over 300 feet. So we don't believe that this lease or this corner should have any real impact on navigating to these piers. And as we heard testimony earlier, it appears that the preferred access to get out of this creek at most all tides is this northern area north of this small island. Again, this is just a copy of the plat of the final survey. Again, we deleted either one of these coves from any surveyed area, and we do believe that large portions of this lease do have suitable bottom that could propagate shellfish, either by enclosures or on bottom aquaculture, depending on the nature of the bottom in that particular area, based on the particular type of activity. We do carefully assess each area during the field survey. Again, a lot of this area was found to be shallow and not suitable. We did not include that in the area. We do believe some areas could support cage aquaculture or bottom aquaculture. And the area around this is undeveloped. Mr. Revercombe owns a big chunk of the land here, and therefore there's not really a lot of residential boating traffic up into this reach of the creek. Certainly it's accessible at high tide by anyone who has a small craft, but navigation in this area should be very cautious because it is very shallow. So therefore, after careful review of the objections raised by the nearby property owners, review of the public trust doctrine, modification of the requested area to a much smaller area, and after considering all the factors of 28.2603 of the code, which is the oyster leasing section, and 28.21205, which is the habitat section, of additional considerations we must consider, staff does recommend approval of this area of 9.36 acres. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Commissioner, I have a question.
Yes.
Chief, the water depth in this area, you said the best area, or evaluated most likely the best area, if you go back to that
Right here.
application, is in that area, if you could go back to the previous slide, is the area around 7.7 and 8 extending down towards 6?
Yes.
Okay. And the water depth in that area between 7, 8, 6, and 9?
This was pretty shallow. It's probably shallower than the other one.
Yeah, it's shallow. At low tide, I would say on average, I was averaging between 1 to 3 feet, and sometimes less than that. I mean, when I came past those islands and came in there at low tide, I'm in a 14-foot skiff, and I had to pull my motor up and kind of push my way in to feel everything out.
And in the area, that's area .12 to 4, that area is about the same depth or shallower?
It varies a little bit, sir, but I would say it's approximately the same. Again, like you mentioned earlier, there's kind of pockets. But I would say on average at low tide, I would say it's between 1 to 3.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions? Mrs. Cowell?
Point number 7, what is the distance from number 7 to land? To that point? Do you have just a ballpark idea?
I don't. I'm sorry.
I can just look at it graphically.
Almost looks like it touches.
I think it's deceiving there. Mr. Evercombe definitely indicated that being a concern because the application was closer to the shoreline there. So I just pulled it off, just eyeballing it to create some space there. But if I had to guess, I would say approximately 30 feet.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Further questions? Applicant present and wish to speak on this project, please come forward. Please state your name and a microphone for the record and raise your right hand.
Robert McBride.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
So I live closer up the property line up here, so I have access to the creek down here on a guy's land that gave me permission to do so. Historically, in the past, I've actually planted oysters in a few of the creeks in the Rappahannock and Piankatank. One of them notably being Wilton Creek, and that's actually made a big impact on the oysters that have been there. None of them in cages, mostly small mature oysters to get them to bloom like they historically have been in the creeks. Before I applied for this application, I actually went in there and looked on the bottom for shells and signs of oysters actually being there in the past, and they were, but disease and whatnot have actually killed them out. And my whole goal for this would be to have naturally growing oysters in there, per se, for mostly to rehabilitate the creeks in the area. I do believe that, I think part of the project of leasing the oyster lands were to help the native oysters, through spats and whatnot. And that is my whole goal for this property right here. If I were to use cages, properly marked that is stated, I don't see that they would be any different than peeler pots that are used that sometimes are actually misleading where they would be at from the buoys. Because if they have 18 foot of line on there, the buoys are actually further away from where they would be at. So I'm very willing to work with anybody to not cause any kind of disruptions, and hopefully all the local creeks will be brought back, through rehabilitation of the oysters, because I think that is very important of the creeks and their health. And most of these creeks are not very healthy because everything is dying in them.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any speakers in opposition? State your name for the record. You've already been sworn in. Just state
Thank
your
you.
name for the record.
First of all, if you go down there in February and the wind's blowing over the creek, it's not gonna be any water in the creek. I've lost a lot of boots trying to walk across that creek, and I guarantee it's muck. That's what it is. Getting back to what I was originally gonna speak about, the recreational use and safety is very important to us. The creek is narrow and shallow in the area proposed. From my dock to the corner pole of the oyster bed is about 100 yards. He said 300 feet, so I'm pretty close to that. So this activity is gonna happen in my front yard. And I get up on Saturday morning, sitting on my porch, having a cup of coffee or something. I'm gonna have to look at it and see them servicing these oyster baskets. Once they get a permit, they can put baskets, anything they want in there. So you can see, I'm only gonna seed this or seed that. First thing you know, here's a basket out there, and here's somebody on a jet ski hitting it. There's a lot of activity, recreational activity in the creek, like I said earlier. Because when it's rough out in the water, people are coming in the creek using their jet skis, paddle boards, kayaks, canoes, anything. And we enjoy seeing them come in there. Usually they're kind enough to stay on that side away from us of the creek where they're proposing to put these oyster baskets. That way, the jet skis don't make all the noise, they don't create a wake, and they stay away from our docks. So that's where they use, in and out, and same thing with the paddleboard people and all like that. So they use this area that he's proposing to put oysters in more than they do any other area. There are 3 houses on the creek, and mine is the first pier, the one he showed that was 300 feet away from that pole. There's 3 houses on the creek, and one, Mr. Rivercombs, at the end, mouth of the creek, or right there. There have been 3 new houses built there in the last 8 years, from scratch. The other house that's on the creek is being renovated right now. And the reason we did this was cost to use the creek. The property value, especially with the land that Kathy owns and the Rivercombs own, is probably worth $5 or $6 million, including the houses and that. So it's quite an investment people have put in to use that water and enjoy that creek. The creek is just picturesque. It's like a park. We've done a great job maintaining that creek. We've looked out for that creek, and that creek is healthy. It's got grass growing everywhere. And there's not that much boat activity because it's so shallow. We thought so much of the creek that we bought 181 acres at the end of the creek and turned it into a conservation easement to protect the creek. Because the man was going to build 181 units in there, which was more than all of Waterview, and make overnight docking and dredge the creek and do all kind of things in there, which we didn't want. There are 2 full-time residents and 2 half-time residents of these 4 houses. I'd like to know how they plan on working these baskets they're gonna put in there. Do they have to clean them? Do they pull them up? Do they have to pressure wash them? Or are they gonna be disturbing the bottom when they pull them up? I'd like to know how that's gonna happen if the baskets go in there, and they probably will. We know this creek, and we've been watching it change over 50 years. And those ways we can go in and out, even the one we go out now, will change. We guarantee. We hope the good Lord and Mother Nature will open up another path for us. But there's no guarantee. Any good the oysters would do in that creek would be outweighed by the damage to the creek and the ill will it will cause. At this time, I think we all should be preserving natural areas like Harry George Creek, not changing them. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else in opposition wish to speak on this matter? Matters before the commission. Mr. Minor.
Yeah, so, first of all, I want to thank staff for this. This is kind of, well, I will say this, I took some notes down. The original plan was for 21 acres, which has been reduced now to 9.36 acres, am I correct?
Yes, correct.
And it's about 300 feet away from the piers or shorelines, am I
Yes.
correct on that?
Yes.
So, to me, I believe in that magic word compromise. So I would like to make a motion that we approve staff recommendation.
Motion on the floor.
Second.
There's a second by Ms. Kellum. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hold on.
Hold on one second.
Commissioner, I had a question for staff.
Sure.
The question about subaquatic vegetation, I know we traditionally don't lease over that.
Yeah,
Is there any?
There's no SAV in this area.
Okay, that was
Right.
determined by
There's a
the
lot of
survey.
marsh, there's a lot of marsh in this
Okay.
creek.
I
It's
just wanted
healthy.
to clear that up.
Right.
If there was any
Right.
subaquatic vegetation, we could entertain that. That's all I have, sir.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed?
One opposed, France. Thank you, Mr. Stay. You guys want to work through lunch? We only got- All right, next item on the agenda, public comment. For any of those who want to make comment, please come forward. Mr. Bezos first. Please, ma'am, state your name for the record. I'm going to put you guys on the timer, so try to get to your point, please. Raise your right hand. State your name for the record.
Kimberly Williams.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I will.
Proceed.
Thank you for hearing me today. I'm here because on August 5th, a story in the Richmond Times-Dispatch published by reporter Patrick Wilson revealed that a sitting Virginia Marine Resource Commissioner, Mr. James J.J. Minor, was secretly lobbying for a gas pipeline company that will soon seek a permit from the VMRC. According to the Times-Dispatch, Mr. Minor was promoting TC Energies, also known as Columbia Gas Transmission, Virginia Reliability Project, a pipeline expansion that will require a water crossing permit from VMRC. More than that, the newspaper reported that Mr. Minor already approved as a VMRC commissioner a smaller TC Energy project in June. This looks like a clear conflict of interest and a very troubling attempt by TC Energy to influence the environmental reviews in its favor. And as far as I know, the VMRC has yet to say anything publicly about this case, but the public deserves an answer. Commissioner Green, I'm asking, as chair of the commission, what is your response to this case? What actions have you taken against those responsible for it? How can the VMRC trust TC Energy as it presents its projects before this agency? Have you taken any steps against TC Energy?
Ma'am, for the record, and I'm going to go ahead and entertain this one time. There has not been any issues since I've been in this seat, sitting in this chair, and none by Mr. Minor as well. So if you want to talk about the past or the future, I don't know what else to tell you. You can proceed. You got 45 more seconds.
I just want to say that your job is to protect Virginia Natural's resources, not to protect fossil fuel corporations or those who lobby for them. You can't pretend that this didn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Next speaker, please. Please raise your right hand and state your name for the record.
John Bello, and I do.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Good morning. Good afternoon, excuse me, Associate Commissioners. So there's no misunderstanding. I also serve on the FMAC Committee, Fisheries Management Advisory Committee. My comments today are my own. They do not represent FMAC. Last month, I came before you and asked for three things. One, that you assess penalties for the dead red drum. Two, that you direct staff to prepare management alternatives to the management of the industrial menhaden harvest. And three, that you hold a public hearing on those alternatives. Our desire was to have that fishery moved out of the bay. To be clear, my comments do not reflect the bait industry in any way. I support an increase in the bait quota. You've already heard enough about the net spills, number one. You've already heard about the 12,000 red drum. I do believe there should have been penalties assessed for that. My second point was that VMRC has responsibility to the citizens of Virginia under the public trust doctrine. Menhaden are a resource that belong to all Virginians and not just one company. The public trust doctrine holds that it's the responsibility of the government to manage natural resources for the benefit of all citizens. Virginia Code 28.2-203 on preparing fishery management plans states that conservation and management measures shall prevent overfishing while achieving an optimum yield from each fishery. The optimum yield of a fishery means the amount of fish or shellfish which will provide the greatest overall benefit to the Commonwealth, with particular reference to commercial fishing for food production and to recreational fishing. For food production and recreational fishing. The industrial reduction fishery does not produce food for human consumption, and it certainly does not benefit recreational fishing. To summarize, I'm asking two things. One, you direct staff to prepare management measures and alternatives with impacts for your consideration at a future public hearing, and that one of those alternatives be moving this fishery out of the bay into the ocean. And second, I'm requesting that you hold a public hearing on those alternatives so that the public can speak. Thank you for your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I beat the timer.
You did good. You did very good. Thank you, sir. State your name for the record, please.
Charles Glenn Lewis.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir. I do.
Proceed.
I'm a recreational fisherman. I came here from Richmond, Virginia today to speak on an incident that happened to me in the bay that I felt like it was intimidation. I took a vacation in Cape Charles for a week and a half. Went over there, couldn't fish for the first part of the week. There's a lot going on in the bay with all the menhaden and everything that's going on for recreational fishermen. I used to take trips over to Cape Charles once a year to stay in for rockfish season. I don't do it anymore. I get out and I go fishing. I get out finally because the weather is clear on Monday, September 12th. Probably sneak out about 1:30. Can't find anybody to go with me, so I go on my boat alone. I'm a sight fisherman. I'm looking for blue skies. I'm looking for wherever I can. And I moved north towards our buoy R38 on the inside of the channel. The most further tanker is parked. I start seeing pods of menhaden. I start working the menhaden, and I start seeing cobia inside the menhaden. That's what I'm after, one fish at a time. usually catch and release, just something that I love to do. It wasn't long after I hear planes over top of me. I just know that something's coming. 30 minutes later, I look over my shoulder, south-southwest. Here comes three big tankers coming right at me. I mean, beelining it. I'm so upset, and I'm a passionate person. I got really upset, and then started trying to figure out what I was going to do. That boat was still coming. That head boat had the audacity to hit a horn. I felt intimidated. I was very upset. I would like to use other words right now. And I started moving out of their way. That boat came right in between both buoy R38 and me. I was headed towards the tanker, getting out of their way. I picked up my camera off my phone and I started filming a little bit of it. It is not a good video because I'm very upset. And the end result is, I think they saw me videoing, they turned around and they left. One went all the way north, one circled back around and came where it went from, and one flanked me pretty hard as I was heading to that tanker. And I just don't think it's right. I don't think what's going on is right. I'm not allowed to use a drone when I fish. These guys are using planes to find these fish. And Chesapeake Bay is an incubator. It is an incubator for fish, for red drum, for stripers, for cobia. They come here to have their babies. And to take the food they need to travel in here to eat. They need that food so they can get here, so they can spawn, so they can rebirth. And they leave, they've got to have that. They've got to have food to travel out of the bay. Well, there's less and less pods of bait. And I'm finding cobia eating on the way out. And the season's over. I mean, most of them are gone, but I'm still finding cobia eating, trying to eat before they leave. It's not right. Something needs to change. I'm not supporting the fishery in December anymore. A lot of my colleagues that fish in this industry don't do it anymore. Cape Charles has got to be hurting. The bait shops have got to be hurting. You know, I just wanted to come here today, travel this far. I've got work to do in Richmond, but I felt it was necessary for me to be heard and what happened out there. And I just wanted to say my piece, so thank you for listening.
Thank you. Hold on a second. Any questions? Mr. Branson?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Did you, you're saying these vessels were what now? You said,
They're mega protein boats.
okay, they were
Yes.
commercial fishing vessels. Did you
Yes.
report this to the Secretary, Coast Guard?
When I was so
or
fired
Marine
up,
Police?
I reported it the following Monday when I got home from vacation. I did not know what to do. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't even, he told me that if I wanted to make a report, that was good. And so I gave him the report. It was the head man in Cape Charles who took the report from me. I can't remember his name. So it was around 2:30 on Monday when it happened. So I reported it, and I reported it a week later that it happened. I was just still frustrated when I got home. I think you can even feel it in me now that I'm frustrated. I don't even know who this else happened to, but I know that a lot of fishermen are scared to stand up and speak on this part, or even want to, because of the intimidation factors that are out there. So I just, I did make it a following week later when I got home from vacation, just trying to figure out what to do, and I made a phone call.
Mr. Lewis, if you run in a situation where you feel intimidated on the water in any shape or form, we definitely don't want that in the Commonwealth. The individuals in them gray shirts back there, you ask for contact information when you walk out. I'm pretty sure they can give you the phone numbers if you ever feel in a need to call. The Marine Police will respond.
I realize that. I'm a grown man, and I do understand that. And I know that, I just didn't know what to do in that instance, and I don't think a lot of fishermen this might be happening to, but, the whole fact that they blew the horn for me to get out of the way, and for their spotter plane to circle around me and know exactly where to come and look down and see all that pods, because I was in a lot of pod of Menhaden. There was no doubt there was a lot of pods of Menhadens that I was working. I could see 50 yards, there's another pod, 50 yards, another pod. So every time I would go to the pod, I would see some cobias almost working inside of them. So some were not, but they were small pods. They weren't like large. But to the point, it just, for them to come in and on top of me like that and then push me out, I get it's
it,
not
sir.
right.
Is there any more questions for the commission? Mr. Lewis? Thank you, sir. Thank you. How you doing, sir?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you. Great to be back.
State your name, please, and raise your right hand.
Steve Atkinson. I am president of the Virginia Saltwater Sports Fishing Association, and I'm a recreational angler.
You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Absolutely.
Proceed, sir.
Great to be back. Hey, I understand I could not use the overhead, but if it's okay with the commission, I have 2 things to hand out.
Sure,
that okay?
absolutely. Come.
The first one I'm handing here is the
Back to the speaker. You gotta say it in the speaker. I'll hand these out.
Thank you. Yes, so the first thing there is there's a letter. I wanted you to see the original letter that was written to the governor back in June from a number of groups that are part of our coalition that essentially asking the governor and hence the VMRC to do something about the menhaden reduction industry in the Bay. So that's the letter. I just wanted you to have it for your reference. I also wrote a 2-page letter that I understand is in your workbooks or whatever, and I appreciate you putting it there. That was my response to some comments that were made at the last meeting. And so the second thing I want to do is just make a comment about the map. All of you have a map here, and I guess the way I would summarize this is that the Chesapeake Bay is under assault. That's how I would call it. That's what I would call it. That is a map of reduction net sets during the year 2016. That was the most current year I could get, but I think you would see a similar pattern today. And what this shows is that every dot basically is a net set in the bay. So this gives you a visual of the kind of intense fishing pressure that the bay is under for menhaden. And you can see there, one of the things you'll immediately see, because I know the net spills have come up many times, you'll notice that there's extreme pressure on the eastern side of the bay, fairly close to the shore. And so that sets up a problem with net sets, among other things, because the dominant wind during the summer is southwest. And if you get a net spill, and if you look where all those dots are, stacked up on the eastern side of the bay, you can easily see how thousands of dead fish are going to wash up on the beaches. The other thing I think this shows, in my mind, is we've got this Chesapeake Bay that seems big, but relatively speaking, it's fairly small compared to the other parts of the ocean there where reduction fishing is occurring. Up and down the coast, right up off as far north as Atlantic City. So again, I think this kind of presents a pretty clear picture that we've got intense fishing pressure which we believe is risking the ecosystem in the bay and risking the food web. I know there's this term localized depletion. I'm not going to attempt to define it. It's a loaded term, to say the least. But I would certainly offer that localized depletion is a possibility or a risk in the Chesapeake Bay, and I think it needs to be seriously looked at. A couple of the comments, as you know, we don't say that menhaden are overfished. They're not overfished coast-wide. But once again, that is a coast-wide designation. It has nothing to do with what's going on in the Chesapeake Bay. Menhaden recruitment in the bay has been low for a few years, and that's another red flag. I did want to mention the Chesapeake Bay, I guess it's called CHESMAP study that my friend Monty Deal mentioned last month, because I think this is very important. He indicated that in that study, menhaden were not considered a key forage fish. What he did not tell you is that the reason they were not considered a key forage is because in order to be considered key, they have to be important for 2 or more of the species that were in that study. Well, one of those species was striped bass, which they're very important for, but the other species were flounder, croaker, skate, and perch. Now, I think all of us know, any of us that fish, menhaden are not important to skate and perch and flounder. I think we know that. So the other things like cobia, red drum, etc., stripers, of course, menhaden are all very important to them, but they were not considered key because of the way they defined that study. The other thing I would add is that the scientific ecosystems model that was developed by Andre Buckheister and others clearly shows a strong correlation between menhaden and striped bass. And in fact, his model predicts that because of excessive menhaden fishing along the coast, that striped bass numbers have been reduced by almost 30% over time coastwide. Again, not the bay, but coastwide. Thank you for that.
Is there any questions, Mr. Atkins?
There's more to come here.
Mr. Tank?
So when I read your letter here, you mentioned 600,000 anglers annually. Do you have any, how'd you come up with that number? It seems pretty
600,000
low.
anglers. There are, I don't have that letter in front of me, there are 320,000 saltwater anglers in Virginia, and then Virginia brings in, they think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 for tourism. That, you know, all these guys that get on charter boats, we've got some charter captains here today. I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you about that. But when you add them all up, the economic activity associated with this fishing in the bay is phenomenal. It's a very big number.
So in other words, you're confident of the 600,000?
I think so. It might be 580, it might be 605, but it's a very large number. And I'm very confident that we've got 320,000 resident Virginia saltwater anglers that fish the bay. Yes.
Any further questions from the commission?
Now, I'd like to make one more statement if I could, and that is, Omega Protein is going to get up here in a minute and disagree with what I've just
All right.
said.
We're done.
Okay.
You're trying to rebuttal something that happened yet.
All right.
You know how I feel about that, Mr. Atkins. But thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Next speaker. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Bob Mandigo.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Commissioner and Directors. My name is Bob Mandigo. I'm the treasurer of Tidewater Anglers Club, the director for the Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association, and a Virginia recreational angler since 1964. So I'm getting a little old. Referencing Virginia Code Section 282-203, your job is to prepare fishery management plans so as to preserve the Commonwealth's exclusive right to manage the fisheries within its territorial jurisdiction, in accordance with the standards that shall prevent overfishing while achieving optimum yield from each fishery. The optimum yield of a fishery means the amount of fish or shellfish which will provide the greatest overall benefit to the Commonwealth, with particular reference to commercial fishing for food production and to recreational fishing. Your charge is similar to the work I did while serving on Virginia Beach City Council 20 years ago. We decided requests for rezonings and zoning variances to properties within the city, working diligently to balance those requests with existing neighboring property uses and the city's strategic plan. We also wanted the highest and best uses of the properties. All involved public hearings when there were disputed claims by neighboring properties, as well as general public interest in proposed changes. Your charge is similar, but for fisheries management. We're asking you to hold a public hearing on menhaden management in the Chesapeake Bay to better balance the commercial reduction industry's taking of menhaden within Virginia's portion of the Chesapeake Bay with the recreational needs of anglers targeting game fish that prey upon menhaden based on the best information available. We need you to determine the optimum take of menhaden and balance that with the needs of the game fish you already manage and the industrial menhaden reduction fishery. I also want Omega Protein to remain in business and to be profitable. As a recreational angler, I also want menhaden available as food for the fish I want to catch. Also, I'm tired of the inevitable fish spills from torn nets and the resulting waste of game fish bycatch and the resulting polluted beaches. I'm also concerned that without your action at some point, Omega will ultimately put itself out of business by taking the last menhaden from the Chesapeake Bay. We need you to act in determining and balancing the optimum yields for Menhaden. We need you to get the data that you need, and in the interim, to limit Omega's Menhaden harvest in the Chesapeake Bay. This may include banning Omega's operations within Virginia's portion of the bay, at least until you determine and allocate the optimum yield. The Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association has sponsored an online petition that now has more than 10,000 signatures to cease Omega's harvest in the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you for your time.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you, sir. Thank you. Please raise your right hand and state your name in the microphone for the record, please.
John Powers.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed, sir.
Commissioners, hello, my name is John Powers, and I'm here representing my own views, those of VSSA, of which I'm an officer, and the many anglers with whom I've discussed on social media the issue of the reduction industry fishing in the bay. Many of the anglers I've encountered have expressed growing alarm over the continued policy of the state of Virginia that allows omega protein in ocean fisheries to harvest up to roughly 112 million pounds of menhaden from the Chesapeake Bay every year. The anglers I talk to have developed a deep cynicism with regard to the apparent lack of skillful management of the reduction industry's frequent and apparently unavoidable release of bycatch into the bay and its beaches. They see no real accountability, no penalties for this waste of public resources, and no incentive for them to improve their operations. Although I do not share it, their cynicism is well-founded in my view. No other state of the 15 states on the eastern seaboard allows this kind of taking of public resources in our bay for private profit, except for Virginia. And no other state sees the waste of tons of bycatch that pollute our beaches and bay that Virginia does. Well, perhaps now Louisiana is also getting a taste of Omega's fishing operation with its recent admission to abandoning a full pogie net in Cameron Parish with 900,000 menhaden and bycatch in it. Having only recently been tasked with the job of active management of the bay's menhaden resources, this board is now engaged in formulating its fisheries management plans as required by the Code of Virginia. Three events suggest that this time in the board's history is truly an inflection point in the long history of reduction fishing in the bay. Number one, management of the bay's menhaden fishery has only been recently assigned to VMRC. Two, the governor has recently appointed 4 new members to this board. And 3, he has said publicly that he wants to be a good steward of the bay's resources, all of which point to an opportunity for change. Every inflection point brings opportunities and risks. The risk is always that those who are new will simply go along with, quote, business as usual, leaving the status quo in place and long festering problems to continue to boil along, conveniently relegated to a back burner. But clearly, inflection points bring opportunities as well as risks. But to correct long festering problems, creative imagination, moral courage, and intellectual honesty are required. We should not underestimate, as the cynics do, the ability of people of goodwill to take a fresh look at old problems to envision new solutions. I suggest that the principles in the Code of Virginia, Section 28.2-203, which was referred to by two previous speakers, provide solid guidance. And I would just reiterate the applicability of subsection 1 that talks about particular reference to commercial fishing for food production and recreational fishing. In my understanding, that reference to commercial fishing for food production means the targeted commercial fishermen and the bait fishermen, but not the menhaden reduction fishing industry. And then subsection 4, which talks about conservation and management measures shall not discriminate among user groups if it becomes necessary to allocate or assign fishing privileges among various user groups. Such allocation shall be 1, fair and equitable to all fishermen, 2, reasonably calculated to promote conservation, and 3, carried out in such manner that no person acquires an excessive share of such privilege. I strongly encourage the Board of Commissioners to think carefully about these principles outlined in the sections of the Code of Virginia, and then schedule a public hearing on reduction fishing in the Chesapeake Bay for October. Thank you.
Any questions from the commission for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Thank you. Come on, sir. Step to the microphone, state your name for the record, and raise your right hand.
Name is David Francis.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
Proceed.
I work for Naval Sea Systems Command out of D.C. for headquarters. I took the day off to be here to speak. Wanted to provide a testimony on what I witnessed in the Chesapeake Bay on August 30th. I took videos and shared with Mr. Atkinson online. He invited me to come speak here today in front of you. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I've got to say. On August 30th, I too am a Virginia resident, recreational angler. I enjoy fishing throughout all seasons, particularly cobia fishing. It's one of my favorite pastimes. I also take charters, and hire captains and go on charter boats. I'm in the network and speak to a lot of them on a regular basis. What I saw on August 30th has given me nightmares. I saw from, I took off out of Lynn Haven and went up into the northern section of the bay near Cape Charles. If you're familiar with the CY buoy area, it's a pretty popular buoy there. So going a little bit north of the CY, about a mile north toward Cape Charles, we started seeing filthy, disgusting looking water where it went from a nice clean bluish green color to brown, murky, cloudy water. Then we started seeing trash. I started noticing dead seabirds floating around. I also started seeing dead menhaden. And the further we went, the more trash and the more death that we saw. We saw a dead sea turtle that day. I took pictures and I took video, and I was extremely heartbroken. If I estimated a number of dead menhaden, I would assume we saw close to 1 million dead fish. Now, we went from the CY buoy looking for cobia, and in an effort to get out of this nasty, disgusting water, we traveled into the ocean through the 3rd and 4th island. This line of filth continued for what I estimate to be about 10 miles and possibly over a mile wide of nothing but trash and dead fish and, like I said, a dead turtle and a bunch of dead birds, and it really it upset me so bad I literally lost sleep and had nightmares over it. Menhaden are very important to all of the marine life in the bay. They, I'm sure they're important to porpoises. I didn't hear anyone mention that. Speckled trout as well. I know that they feed on them as well. So I called in the next day on August 31st, and I made reports to every department that I could think of, including the Virginia Marine Police, the VMRC, the EPA, NOAA, as well as the Virginia Beach Aquarium, the Sea Turtle Department, and made enough reports to where I think I stirred up enough concern to where they sent a plane from Richmond to fly over to observe and see if they could find what I was reporting on. So from my understanding, there were no reported spills that day on August 30th. And like I said, I estimate, there was at least hundreds of thousands of dead fish along with birds and a turtle that I have pictures and video of. For me personally, the last couple of years, the fishing has been pretty tough. This whole year, I did not catch one cobia that was a size enough to keep. I went out on numerous trips and spent thousands of dollars trying to catch just one to bring home to eat, and I couldn't catch one. I couldn't find them hardly anywhere where they're normally at. So fishing has been very non-productive. I'm sure that those seabirds also feed on the menhaden. I also could not find fresh menhaden to buy from bait shops. The local bait shops around here just didn't have any fresh menhaden for sale. And I know for a fact there are proven alternatives to supply omega protein. They don't necessarily, not the company, but the actual omega protein itself that we find in fish oil pills and stuff like that doesn't necessarily come from the fish itself. It comes from the vegetation that they eat. And I know that an alternative would be like a indoor aquaculture to provide these proteins that they're trying to get and harvest. You know, they don't need to be taking billions of individuals and killing all the sea life and stuff in our bay. And I think it's disgusting, and I think they need to get out of our waters. And I'd like to echo on what everyone else said. From my understanding, it's not legal for them to go do this net fishing and reduction fishing in any other state other than here. And this Chesapeake Bay here is precious, and we're going to lose it if we don't put a stop to it. And that's about all I got to say. Would y'all like
Any
to ask
questions? Mr. Branson?
And Mr. Francis, thank you. I appreciate you documenting your observations and making all the reporting. Did you get any feedback from any of the agencies that you reported this to?
Later that day, a sergeant from the Marine Police called me back to inform me that my voice was heard and that they were taking action on it, and that they were sending a plane to fly over the bay to look around that area to see what they could find.
But no reports back from the stranding team about the turtle, the Marine Police get feedback from you, or the Coast Guard, or any other agency that gave you any kind of feedback?
No, sir. And I sent multiple emails from my david.b.francis@navy.mil email address, hoping that they would take it serious and know that it's coming from a credible source. But no, sir, I have not received any feedback since.
Mr. Taggart?
And I'm not familiar with the CY buoy, but I know we were talking about outside the bay there. You said, and you stated 10 miles and 1 mile wide of
Yes,
dead
sir.
fish?
Yes, sir. So the CY buoy is if you're coming in from the ocean between the first island that you come from the eastern shore, we call that the fourth island, and the next one's the third, where that tunnel crosses over going inland, where the channel split and you go toward, was it the Delaware or the Maryland Channel, and then one goes off to the left toward Yorktown. So at that split, that's what we anglers call the CY buoy. So from that area, approximately a mile from that buoy north, I could see it, as far as I could see, it was just murky and dead fish floating around, and you could clearly see it on camera. If I could show you the video, if I could hook it up to here, I could play it for you, but I don't believe I've got a way to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
More than welcome to email that video, anybody would like to see it.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
State your name for the record, raise your right hand.
Yes, sir. Rhett Lynn Townsend.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
Just to follow up on comments he was making, I was actually fishing on that same day as well. There's a wonderful little app called Flight Radar 24, and it'll actually show you the plane's marker beacon and where they're traveling. That day, you can actually see where I was located when I screenshot that, and some of Omega's planes. They normally have about 3 to 8 Cessnas up at any one time in the air. You can tell where they're fishing because they circle right over top of you. And I too have been out there fishing and been absolutely intimidated by Omega proteins. And I had heard from somebody, and I guess it was wrong information. They said, well, you can't impede commercial fishing. And I said, well, if I'm sitting there fishing myself and they come over and start pushing me out of the way, it seems to me like they're intimidating me. And I looked it up. I have a video of it. It's August 6th of 2019. So just so you know, to back up and tell you my whole story, I bought a boat and fell in love with cobia fishing, I guess, back in 2011. I live in Richmond, Virginia, grew up there. Grew up going down to the Outer Banks and fishing saltwater there. I guess that's where I fell in love with it. But I wanted to stay closer to home and the business that I run in Richmond. And ended up just fishing down here for years and years. And finally I got sick of dragging a boat, and the fishing was actually good back in those years from about 2011 on to here in the last few years that I decided to actually go and buy a house. So I think the recreational guys get kind of forgotten for the amount of money we spend. I pay close to $10,000 a year in taxes for my house down here. And that's my summer home, all because I love to fish. You can call me crazy, you can call me whatever I am, but I'm very blessed and able to do what I love in the summertime on the weekends. But it's so frustrating to see such a precious, natural, amazing resource be absolutely destroyed by one single company that's not even owned in this country. It's a Canadian-owned company. We've got to get them out of here. I don't know why we're the only state on the East Coast that allows it. I have to feel it's because of who controlled and governed them for so many years. And I'm very fortunate that it's folks like y'all now doing a great job that can actually change things. And that's what we need. We need a public hearing. You need to hear from folks like myself. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a fishing business guy that does okay. But in the last few years, you'd probably argue that I absolutely sucked at fishing. But I would tell you that it's because of what's going on in the Menhaden. I caught a huge rockfish back in 2011, 2012. It was the biggest fish that charter boat captain had ever put on his boat. It was 50 pounds and 50 inches. Haven't done it ever since. He subsequently passed away. But I couldn't believe that was the biggest fish that man had ever put on his boat. And he'd been fishing since '86, I think he told me. And he told me, he said, that'll be the last big fish you probably ever catch. And we've had a couple years right after that were good. Every year since has been horrible. And I can tell you as a business owner, if you're going to entertain clients that like to fish and go take them out, you're not going to do it when they only are going to go out on a glorified boat ride. It's not worth it. It's not worth their time. I'm not going to call up a good customer friend of mine and say, hey, come fishing with me when it's a glorified boat ride. They know me better than that. So that's money that I'm not spending on fuel, that's not going to restaurants in the area, it's not going to anything down here. And it's happening not just with me, but multiple businesses. I mean, these are banks that take customers fishing. So I mean, it's not just small businesses. Insurance companies, some of the largest insurance brokers in the country, like number 2 in the country for insurance brokerage companies that entertain clients through fishing. Because guys like me and gals that like to fish too, that work, it's a great time to get together. It's a great time for folks to socialize, have a good time. But it all happens around catching fish. Nobody wants to go if they're on a glorified boat ride. It's not fun. So it's funny, if you look back at my catches in the data, 2019 was probably the last good year. 2020, I don't think I even caught a cobia. 21, I think I caught 2. There were actual keepers. And this year, August 30th, was the only day I finally caught a cobia. I fished all through July, June. Each of those trips, I saw maybe 1 or 2 cobia. But the reoccurring thing was every time I saw 0 bait. The bait is gone. You want to know where I caught that one fish? Nobody likes to ever tell you where they catch things. It was off Sandbridge Pier in the Atlantic Ocean. It was not in the Chesapeake Bay. The reason I went there was because I had a suspicion that there would actually be bait outside our beautiful bay.
Your time is up.
Okay.
Any questions for the speaker?
They like to claim, too, that they don't fish because of the weather, and it was pretty, and they were all in the bay on August 30th. Thank you.
Next speaker. Please state your name for the record and raise your right hand.
Randy Whitaker.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Randy Whitaker. I live in Hanover County. I own a home in Essex County on the Rappahannock River. My comments are about recent fish kills and net tears in the Chesapeake Bay done by Cook Brothers, Omega Protein, and the harvesters. I'm a fisherman that fishes the Chesapeake Bay rivers and have to abide by the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Clearly, Cook Brothers, Omega Protein, and Ocean Harvesters do not have to abide by the same laws. What I would like to know is why has nothing been done to these companies since all these fish spills this year? They continue to have multiple net tears and fish kills. Thousands and thousands of pounds of redfish, bunker, and other species have been killed, left to wash up on our beaches. What worries me is there's Not have been any penalties at this time. As of today, not even a comment publicly from y'all or anybody else. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you. Sir. Please raise your right hand. State your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Alan Harris.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Yes, I'm here to share my concerns also about the menhaden fishing in Chesapeake Bay. I'm a lifelong angler, but have only resided in Virginia about 35 years. When I moved to Virginia about 35 years ago, I spent a lot of time fishing both on the western side of the bay and the eastern shore. I had twin boys that are 29 years old now. We spent most of our summers camping and fishing out of eastern shore, our Cherrystone area. And I used to marvel at the menhaden schools. I mean, miles and miles. I saw one school I know was 7 miles long. I mean, for hours, schools of menhaden swimming by. What's the schools of menhaden? The porpoises. In wintertime, you see the whales come in, so beautiful to see. I mean, it was just amazing to me to witness that. And the fishing was so good. I grew up in Carolina. My parents had a cottage on Outer Banks in Kildare Hills, and I thought fishing was so superb down there before I moved to Virginia. And I can say I absolutely fell in love with the Chesapeake Bay. This is such a wonderful resource we have here. But I have noticed, I mean, the menhaden schools you don't see anymore. I know I have many personal experiences seeing the menhaden boats come and just wrap up the school and just haul them in. And I appreciate the commerce side and the need for the products that they sell. But I think that it's been overdone and in Virginia, and you don't see the menhaden like you do anymore. Nothing like that. You don't see the fish. I know when the rock fishing that was so great at one time started getting scarce. Also fishing offshore, the triangle sea bass fishing, you still see the rockfish. Yeah, but instead of being in the bay, they're 12, 15 miles offshore where the menhaden are. And I just implore you to do something about it. You are stewards of this resource, and it's been way overdone in the bay, and not everyone can afford the boats to run 30 miles out to catch a fish that you used to be able to fish catch off the dock right in the bay. Thank you.
Any questions from the commission for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Thanks, Rodney. State your name for the record.
John Talley.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
I'm a fisherman, and I'm a charter boat operator. I have my own charter boat. I have been fishing the Virginia waters for 55 years. My father used to take me. We used to go to the Chesapeake Bay. Millions and millions and millions of bunker. Not anymore. They're gone. I mean, I listen. I don't know if y'all have ever heard them. I listen to Omega during the day. Their planes. I hear them. I hear them tell the boats, push those people out the way so we can get this 50,000 fish net. They used to would never net 50,000. They said it wasn't worth their time. They used to go for 200,000, 300,000. And I've got recordings of them right now that they say push these people out the way. We got to run these critters, I guess they're talking about dolphins, out of the pods of bait. They have killed the charter boat business, especially during rockfish season. I know you hear a lot about rockfish, this and that, but it is dead. Nobody wants to go for one fish. One fish. And it takes you all day, most of the time, to catch one fish per person. It's dead. My business in rockfish season is done. It's done. There's plenty more charter boat captains are the same way, but they're scared. They're scared to say something. I'm not. I've got a big mouth, and the people that know me know it. I have seen the destruction, and I just can't understand how Omega is allowed to come into the Rappahannock River all the way to the bridge. That is a nursery. We are catching little spade fish. We are catching black bass. We are catching all these fish that, when they get a little bigger, they're gone out to the bays, gone out to the oceans. So I don't care what people say. I know that bycatch is large. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Please raise your right hand. State your name for the record, please.
John Tyson.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
I'm 66 years old. I grew up on the Rappahannock River. I didn't know how many years I'd been fishing there. So my wife went back in my family photos, and the first picture I can find is I'm 8 years old at the Norris Bridge, which is a Whitestone bridge with a 20-pound striper. That's all I fish is the Rappahannock River, from the bridge out to the bay. I mean, I striper fish some now with Randy, who just talked. He kind of got me into it when we were retired. I want to tell you about August the 14th of this year. I take kids fishing every weekend. I take my baseball team kids that I've coached, my grandkids. I just love taking kids fishing. August the 14th, my wife, my daughter, and my 2 grandkids left Northview Marina. We fished for 2.5 hours all the way to the Norris Bridge. Never have I not caught a fish till that day. I mean, I didn't know what to tell them. You know, it's never happened to me before. I called John Talley, who just spoke, who's a good friend of mine, and he was up by Urbana, and he told me, he said, John, go under the bridge. So I did. Now, you're not talking half a mile. Right in front of Carter's Creek, if y'all know where that's at, on the drop-off right there. Started catching spot. We've been fishing 2.5, almost 3 hours. My 6-year-old and 4-year-old granddaughters had probably gotten a little tired then. But we ended up catching 20 spot. My daughter caught a 14-inch mullet, which is the biggest mullet she's ever caught. And we caught a bunch of little croakers. You don't catch any big croakers anymore. These little 6- and 8-inch croakers. I'm not a marine biologist. I know that the water was the same on both sides of the bridge. I know the tide was the same. I know the water temperature was the same. So why am I not catching any fish from the bridge to the bay? And you can go above the bridge and catch all you want. You know, I fished the heyday. I've caught 12-inch spot in the river, which you don't do anymore, and I love spot fishing. Today, if I wasn't here, I'd be on the Rappahannock River catching spot. You don't catch them anymore. You're lucky to catch a 10-inch spot. You know, what I want y'all to do is to preserve this for my grandkids. Thank you.
Amen. Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Raise your right hand. State your name for the record.
Tyson Dominy.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. I've been fortunate to have been able to fish from Madagascar to Nova Scotia and almost everywhere in between. I moved here just over 3 years ago, retired, my kids are here, so we came here. I lived in Florida, I moved around the country because of my job. I lived in Florida for 20 years. We used to trailer up here to go fishing to catch striped bass, fly fishing. And used to be able to catch 100 a night without any problem at all. On the lights, under the bridges and whatnot, it was phenomenal fishery. I fished yesterday, everything was short, no bass. I caught 1 bass so far since June in this area. It's depleted. Next week, I'm trailering to New York for 2 weeks where I know I will catch striped bass because there's bunker in the bays, Great South Bay, Peconic, the Sound, the ocean. There are fish there. I will definitely catch some nice fish while I'm there. You just don't catch them here anymore. So my question for you is, Is there a schedule or some time when you're actually going to make a decision on this?
Is there a schedule of time?
Yeah, is this on an agenda to decide whether you're going to continue to allow the bunker fishing in the bay or not? Is there some timeline when the decision will be
The
made?
fisheries management is working on that, and we operate according to code, but proceed.
Okay, well, that's the only question I have. There's nothing else. I just want to know if there's some horizon, is there light at the end of the tunnel when the decision will be made, yea or nay? It doesn't sound like there is.
I just told you, fisheries manager is working on it, and we go by the code.
Okay, is there some way I can look up the code?
Yes, the code is, the state code, Pat Gear can give you the section you need to look at for when we can go into it. Anything else?
No.
Anybody have any questions for the speaker, Commissioner? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. I've got some pictures I'd like to share with you guys. Is that okay?
If I can't keep them, then don't give them to me. Don't
If you
present
need
them.
to keep them, go ahead.
It's not that I need to, I have to if you present them.
Well. Yeah.
You're cutting into your time, by the way.
I am, oh, I didn't know. Start getting, I'm sorry. Start over, please.
Raise your right hand, state your name for the record.
My name is Christy Mettis.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
I wish to thank each and every one of you for the time and attention that you're placing on this issue, because I know it's a hard issue. My name is Christy Mettis, and I live at Silver Beach, Virginia. I'm here to speak to you about the industrial or factory fishing vessels that are currently plaguing our Chesapeake Bay. My goal in speaking with you is to get Omega Protein's reduction fishery on the agenda for the next meeting in October. So I think that's going to be very important. As a resident of Silver Beach, I have witnessed firsthand and on several occasions. This past summer, the destruction and senseless waste of Atlantic menhaden and all species of the fish getting caught in the nets of these fishing giants. And then they wash ashore and they're all dead. Hundreds of thousands of fish from area to area, from creek to creek, when they've had their net spills. This Canadian company uses planes to direct their vessels to the various schools per seine boats to catch the entire school of fish with nets that measure between 200 yards, which equates to 2 football fields, long and the depth of up to 90 foot, and then they're also wide, 90 foot wide. They take their catch to the mothership or storage vessel and then return to Reedville, where they get processed. I have witnessed the damage that this type of industrial reduction fishing is causing our local commercial watermen and women, our recreational fishermen and women, and the impact it's had on our local tourism. It's messing everything up. Our Chesapeake Bay, it's our Chesapeake Bay. It's not deep enough to sustain these massive boats that have football fields of net and 90 foot of water. We don't have that in the bay. So I'm asking you to help us please protect our bay. It's all of our bay, not just anybody, not just Canada's. Omega Proteins Factory reduction fishery has no benefit to the American fisherman or to the American taxpayer. And it's time to shut down this style of fishing and destruction in our Chesapeake Bay and send them into deeper waters in the ocean where they can comfortably fish and don't have to worry about losing their nets. They won't lose them if they're in deeper waters. And as a recap, I would appreciate the VMRC and strongly am begging you to please consider placing this concern on your agenda for October. Thank you so much. Do you all have any questions for me at all?
Commission, any questions from the commission? Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand, please. State your name for the record. State your name for the record and microphone. State your name for the record.
Oh, Thomas Lilly.
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed.
Okay. There's some new members that were not here, I think, last October. I live in Whitehaven, Maryland, near Tangier Sound, just a few miles really away from the Virginia line. And I, like a lot of people in this room, have been fishing in Chesapeake Bay for actually over 70 years in my case. So when I was here last October, I brought with me a letter from the Maryland legislature, the Maryland Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus, in which they expressed grave concerns over the damage that Maryland wildlife are suffering as a result of omega proteins actions in Virginia. And they asked you to do two things: to shorten the season, because most of the damage done here is done in the spring. When we have those 10 boats that are hitting relatively few Menhaden schools coming in. And that Menhaden that's coming in the spring that they can destroy is what our spawning striped bass stock needs. Only omega-3 protein furnished by Menhaden can supply the energy those fish need to propel them all the way to habitat grass and protect them for the rigors of spawning. There's not another thing that will do it. I also brought with me a letter from Dr. Brian Watts, which some of you have seen. Dr. Watts is a very distinguished professor from William and Mary. He's an avian biologist, studied ospreys for many, many decades, actually. And it's his opinion. That was a letter, by the way, that he had written to Governor Northam. So I brought that with me. And it was Dr. Watts' very considered opinion that our Menhaden are dying out on Chesapeake Bay. This isn't everywhere. It's not every group of Menhaden. But overall, the nesting failure for Menhaden is worse now than it was during the DDT era. Okay, and that is the reason for that is that Menhaden are absolutely critical for to feed rapidly growing osprey chicks. Okay, nothing else will do it. Perch won't do it. Flounder won't do it. Minnows won't do it. Only Menhaden will do it, and they are dying as a result of Steve used the term Menhaden depletion. Okay, I want to call one other thing to your attention. The science. As I think most of you can remember, about 10 years ago, we had the Atlantic States Fisheries Commission start something called the Environmental Reference Points Program study. And it essentially studied the role of Menhaden in the Atlantic ecosystem. Okay, and it in particularly focused on the role of Menhaden in the diet of striped bass. And the reason for that is the striped bass is the Commission's target or flagship species, I think it's called. And I think we can call that the same in Virginia and Maryland. It's our most important sport fish by far. It supports 107,000 jobs on the Atlantic coast. It has a total economic impact on the Atlantic coast of $7.7 billion. And if you will look at the, I don't know if I sent my thing to you, I don't know whether I sent you the press release from the Commission in 2020 when they adopted the ERP waypoints. But what they said in that press release is this, and this is critical. They said Atlantic striped bass were the target species of interest in the ERP study because they are the most sensitive species to Menhaden harvest. The most sensitive species to Menhaden harvest. 10 years of delay in not doing anything led to that conclusion, but every one of us knew it to start off with. But anyway, let me turn that phrase around and say what that means is when there's overharvest, striped bass, bad things are going to happen to striped bass. Okay. When there's overharvest.
Your time is up. Your time is up. Is there any questions?
All right, let me just put one sentence if you don't mind.
Better be quick.
Okay. Bad things happen to striped bass if there's overharvest, and the worst thing that can possibly happen to Maryland striped bass has happened. For the last 3 years, we have the lowest young of year production in Maryland. And this is affecting the entire straight bass industry on the
All right,
Atlantic
Mr. Lilly,
coast.
you're going to a paragraph now. So now, is there any questions for Mr. Lilly from the commission? Mr. Lilly, when I say sentence, stick to sentence, please. Thank you. Anyone else wants to speak during public comment? Please raise your right hand and state your name for the record.
My name's Stan Zimmerman.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
My name's Stan Zimmerman, and I'm representing myself as a recreational fisherman and also the 167 members of Peninsula Saltwater Sport Fishermen's Association. One of the things that we would like to recommend that the board consider is, right now, everybody wants Omega out of the bay. And of course, we also want Omega out of the bay. But at the same time, I don't think that's a viable solution. I think that what we need to do is do the same thing they did with crabs, with dredging crabs. Do a moratorium on it for a couple of years, study the results. If the menhaden are coming back and we see the rockfish coming back and the bluefish coming back in the bay and other species, then we'll know that Omega was the issue. In states like New York and New Jersey, where Omega is not allowed to harvest, I grew up in southern New Jersey as a kid. I was born here in Virginia and came back to Virginia in '79 with the military. But there was a period of time where rockfish were pretty scarce in the Delaware Bay and Delaware River. Well, the menhaden have come back up there in force, and now rockfish have come back. The rockfish are spawning in the Delaware River, they're spawning in the Hudson River, and areas like that. Our spawning fish seem to be dying off, and you know, it seems the reason, if you get the menhaden back, that's what the rockfish are feeding on. The bycatch of Omega, most commercial fleets, commercial longliners have to have video going all the time when they're harvesting or when they're pulling in their long lines to show what they're catching. ICAT requires that. If they have video on there, and the other commercial ships, also a lot of them have observers on board to observe what the catch is, what the bycatch is. There are no observers on Omega. Omega just does whatever they feel like doing. Nobody knows what their bycatch is. But we do know that when they have a net spill, last year there were 3 sturgeons that washed up on the beach in Ocean View. I mean, the public saw that. They just washed up a couple days after the spill. Omega's been working off of Pocosin flats for, I don't know if they're working this week, but the last few weeks they've been working off of Pocosin flats. My neighbor lives on Pocosin flats, and the night after they started working there, cobia comes floating up on the shoals right there. He's never seen that happen before. I've been fishing this bay since '79, and I'm out there almost every day now, recreational fishing for specks. But a lot of times when I'm fishing for other things, if Omega is working in an area, then we'll find cobia that are floating. A lot of the times the heads are missing off of them. Same thing with the sturgeons. The heads are ground off them. I don't know why, but it just seems that it's always after Omega's been working an area, when you find a dead fish floating, the head's missing off of it. So anyway, that's our recommendation, that we look at options for Omega. There's no reason they can't work the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Any others want to speak during public comment? That being said, on the fisheries.
Good afternoon, Commissioner, Commission members.
Good afternoon, Ms. Ramsey. How are you?
Good, how are you guys? This will be brief.
I like brief.
Okay, this is a public hearing today, proposal to amend Chapter 4 VAC 20-490 pertaining to sharks, to modify the spiny dogfish trip limit to 7,500 pounds. Just a little bit of background about spiny dogfish. In federal waters, they're managed jointly by the Mid-Atlantic and New England Fishery Management Councils under a single fisheries management plan. In 2003, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission approved an interstate management plan that complements this federal plan. The quota for spiny dogfish is allocated by region. Here in Virginia, we are part of the southern region, and we are allocated 10.795% of the coastwide quota. You will see here on this chart below that in the 2021-2022 season, our quota has remained the same both seasons at approximately 3.2 million pounds. In the southern region, states are allowed to set their own state waters trip limits. Approximately 80% of Virginia's spiny dogfish fishery occurs in federal waters. And historically, Virginia's trip limits have mirrored the federal trip limit. Just to give you a little bit more background about our fishery, we currently have 82 people that are qualified for a spiny dogfish permit. And in last season, which was the 2021-2022 season, and our season runs May 1 through April 30th, we only had 19 active permits, so 19 active participants. In the fall of 2021, Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council began discussing a trip limit increase at the request of the northern spiny dogfish processors. Initially, the spiny dogfish processors requested a trip limit increase of 12,000 pounds, but through a review of previous trip limit increases, the Mid-Atlantic Council concluded that a small incremental trip increase would not negatively affect the prices, and they came to the compromise of 7,500 pounds. And then on April 7th, National Marine Fisheries Service published their final rule, which increased the spiny dogfish trip limit from 6,000 to 7,500 pounds in federal waters. In August 2022, staff was approached by our industry members, harvesters, and buyers, asking for the VMRC to consider raising our trip limit from 6,000 to 7,500 pounds to mirror the federal limit. In your evaluation packets, you have the letter requesting this increase. The potential benefits of this increase, it would mean less trips necessary to achieve the quota. The quota would remain exactly the same. Quota is not increasing or decreasing at this time. Less trips would mean decreased fuel costs for the harvesters and decreased shipping costs for the buyers. Currently, majority of our spiny dogfish have to be shipped up north to be processed. This chart is just to give you an example of what our pounds landed versus our quota looks like. The quota here in the red bar reflects the final quota for the fishing season, including any transfers that Virginia has received from other states. Okay, this is the small change we're asking to make today. This is section 42 of chapter 490, 42D. All we're looking to do is get rid of 6,000 pounds and increase the trip limit to 7,500 pounds. Staff recommendation is that the commission approve amendments to Chapter 4 VAC 20-490 pertaining to sharks to modify the spiny dogfish trip limit to 7,500 pounds. Aside from the initial industry request, staff has received no public comment on this issue. I can take any questions.
Any questions from the commission? Is there anyone that wants to speak for or against this item on the agenda? That being said, matters before the commission. Mr. Branson.
Yeah, I'd make a motion to accept the change to 7,500 pounds per trip.
Mr. France, probably. Second. Seconded by Mr. Branson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That was a long one.
Thank you.
We'll conclude the meeting. There's no further business. The meeting is adjourned. The next commission meeting will be Tuesday, October 25th, 2022.